Ways and Means Committee. Today is Tuesday, March 31st. It is 1:15. We are beginning our week of Ed Finance. We're going to be putting together all of the pieces from the whiteboard for this week and into next week. Expecting to get the underlying bill from education probably on Thursday and have that scheduled. We will likely skip the floor at various times. So if anyone has any need to not do that, please do let me know at the end of the day today. And that's that. We might meet on Monday, we might not. But please hold the time for Monday morning, 9 to 12. So we are going to start our day today talking about school construction. We have a long list of testimony, so I'm going to ask folks to hold questions for each witness until that witness finishes their testimony. And the last two pieces on the agenda, we can push a little bit if we need be. So with that, John, can you tell us about how school construction works under existing law?
Sure can. So John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel, said that I would not screen share, and I will not do that in part because there are so many witnesses. But if the committee is interested, I'm happy to share afterward a PowerPoint I do have. It's kind of like a historical overview if folks are interested in that, but I don't think we have time for it today during testimony. So as you know, a moratorium was imposed on the current state aid for school construction program back in 2007. That's Act 52 from that year. Those laws related to state aid for school construction are still on the books. They're still in Title 16. We have a new program in Act 73 that will be largely going effective July 1, 2026. So what has been happening since the moratorium was imposed? Well, some things have continued to receive state aid. So certain emergency projects, for instance, do receive state aid under the program. But for the most part, the previous state aid program is not going out to any school districts. And so the simple way to explain this is that your school district votes a bond, and those ongoing payments that they have for school construction are part of the district's education spending, which means that they increase the district's per pupil spending. And so your local district will have an elevated homestead rate reflecting that school district spending that you're doing on school construction. Additionally, those costs are shared statewide, right? So the yield is lowered to increase raising of revenues across the state. And so currently your school construction costs are captured in the general state funding of public education that we do. There's no categorical aid that goes out other than potentially if you're receiving emergency aid up to small caps under the program. But it is treated like any other education spending under the current system. At this point, I should say there is a slight difference in the way that it's treated for purposes of excess spending. As you know, that excess spending subjects per pupil spending above a particular threshold. That's 118% under current law to double taxation. And you may recall that there's a carve out for voter approved bond payments pre-July 1, 2024. So under existing law, that kind of education spending, school construction costs is not counted for excess spending and subjected to double taxation, but it still does result in an increase in the district's per pupil spend, raising its local offset rate.
And for districts that are having bond payments that were voted in after 2024, is sort of a pay as you go versus a bonded debt. Are those two types of spending treated differently under current law?
I don't believe that those are treated. If you don't do something to address the post July 1, 2024, then the effect on per pupil spend will be different for the different districts. But the actual mechanism for funding is the same, which is that it's raised statewide through the property tax. The non-homestead rate increases as well to raise ed spending. So your homestead and your non-homestead also go up. But mainly it impacts how much variation occurs in your homestead rate.
Representative Odie?
Thank you. You said emergency projects get help. Can you tell me what's the definition of an emergency project and what's the help they get?
So the provision under existing law, even through the moratorium, is under Title 16, Section 3448. And it says that the secretary may grant aid through the standard aid process for a project that the secretary deems to be an emergency. So that is a discretionary call right, and it's up to a maximum total project cost of 100,000. I should say that the aid itself is not going to be the total project cost, right? It's a particular portion of that. Under the standard, like a standard project is 30% of approved costs. So you could think of a maximum there as being, 30K. But it's a discretionary call. It's a relatively low monetary figure. And I think looking to the rules would be the best place for understanding.
Okay. That's another question.
You may.
Separate them down. Can you give an example when you, post 2024, like Colchester, what does it look like on their homestead rate? If we don't,
If you don't do anything.
anyways,
Yeah,
you
but
just,
so I wouldn't be able to give you numbers in terms of the impact, but the basic way to explain it is that we're calling out that post July 1, 2024, because we're saying this is something where it's going to count toward excess spending. And so what that means for your hypothetical Colchester district is that it's approved bond payments, and we're stipulating, I assume, that it takes them above the excess spending threshold, which means that their per pupil spend is in excess of 118% of historic FY25 statewide average per pupil spending, inflated to current date. So we're stipulating that in this hypothetical, Colchester is above that threshold. And so the way that its homestead rate is going to be determined, one, the yield is going to be lowered to raise additional revenues. So every district is going to pay more as a consequence of that lowering. But the particular way in which Colchester will be most directly impacted is the variation in its homestead rate. It's going to have an increase in its per pupil spending, and I'm going to put aside the excess spending for now and just say, let's say you went from 15K to 18K as a consequence, so 18K per pupil. That larger figure is now divided by a smaller yield, which produces a larger homestead rate. The additional impact of the excess spending threshold is that the portion of your per pupil spend that is above that threshold is double counted. What that means is that the way your homestead rate is determined is per pupil spend plus the amounts above the threshold. That's the double counting that happens. Then divided by the yield. So Colchester is having a number of things happen in this hypothetical. One, its per pupil spend goes up, which we know will increase their homestead rate. Two, the yield is being lowered to increase statewide rates writ large. That also increases their homestead rate. And three, they're double taxed on that piece above the excess spending threshold. Those are the three ways you can think of their rate is increasing. Sorry, I don't have numbers to show you, but that's the simple way to explain it, is that the three mechanisms that are increasing that post July 1, 2024 hypothetical districts homestead rate are increase in per pupil spend, excess spending, decreasing yield. Those are the three mathematical mechanisms that do it.
appreciate that.
Sure.
Really.
Nice.
Thanks, John.
Sure. And if folks want that PowerPoint, I can provide, but I don't want to distract during many witnesses you will have.
Thank you. Can you send it and then people can look at
Sure.
it? And then we'll post that, and then the sort of very beginner language that we're working on from here is also posted under John's name.
Perfect.
Michael here.
He's on Zoom.
Oh, gosh, right there.
Hi there.
Hey, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
I'm supposed to start out. Michael Gahn, Executive Director of the Vermont Bond Bank.
Hello.
Hello. Not 100% sure what we'll be addressing, but happy to answer questions here.
Thank you, Michael. We are sort of diving back into our school construction work. and want to understand what your role at the bond bank would be if we restarted a school construction program.
Okay, great. Great. Yeah, so maybe should I just jump in?
Jump right on in. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so if we restart a school construction program, at least, with the task force report from a few years ago, pending major decisions on all of your parts, if we were to move forward with like a reimbursement type arrangement for debt service costs, the bond bank envisions our role being similar to the RIBEC, the Rhode Island public authority instrumentality that handles reimbursements to schools in Rhode Island. So what that would mean is that we sort of see ourselves as a convenient way to effectuate a role as kind of like a fiscal agent for the reimbursement. So some entity, AOE or otherwise, would decide that the project qualifies. Would be the project then would in that district would receive, X amount, X percentage of reimbursement of debt service costs. The bond bank, for the most part, either directly holds the loans for school district construction or is very familiar with the process by which bond payments occur and would know the right questions to ask. And so, therefore, it would be a convenient way to monitor that debt service payments have occurred, validate that, and then do the flow of funds of money that needs to go to that school district. This also preserves our ability to effectuate the state intercept, which is the primary form of credit enhancement for school districts, both in Vermont and in over 30 states. And so I think practically what that would mean is that the sort of pot of money that's used for reimbursing debt service costs, we could hold in like a fiduciary account, verify that debt service on related projects has been paid, and then in short order reimburse that school district for those costs. So I think that's the primary role. And of course, as always, and we've had more expansive conversations over the past few weeks and months, we're very interested in ways that we can control costs on this very large undertaking. And so always available to lend our perspective and thoughts on how to control costs.
Are there any particular ways you'd flag that we should, for us to do this as effectively as possible, given the scale we're going to need to be working at?
For construction aid specifically.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, we've talked a little bit about the potential for aggregating projects together so that you don't have project on project competition and driving up costs as a result and finding efficiencies in procuring construction. So that, there's a number of ways to do that. So that's one thing I think makes a lot of sense. But as it also just relates to flow of funds, I think having the bond bank in this role as kind of a fiscal agent makes some sense because you don't have, well, there's going to be less districts going forward in all likelihood, but you don't have 20 plus districts communicating with AOE and verifying that they've paid their debt service and then getting, having all that paperwork. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Hang on for a second.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Technical difficulty, so.
And he started again with fiscal agent. The same, right?
So much for our pre-prepping.
If you disconnect your microphone while you're in the Zoom.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's all this.
Okay, great. Okay. Back to you, Michael. Can you start with fiscal agent if you have any idea? I never remember my sentence once it comes out of my mouth, so I don't know if you can do that.
Yeah, no, I just think it would be very efficient for the school districts while
Yeah.
also maintaining the integrity of the state intercept. So as opposed to AOE having to verify, 20 plus school districts' debt service payments semi-annually. We can do that by just literally looking at our invoicing reconciliations, and then would be able to very efficiently reimburse those school districts for 90% of the school districts who use the bond bank as their method of financing. And I just think that would just have a lot of efficiencies, basically. And that's how Rhode Island does it as well. And so they came to a similar conclusion.
Do you, is there any way you would want to differentiate new construction from rehab or expansion?
From our perspective as fiscal agent or financing entity,
I would say from your perspective as a
Oh.
person who's been part of these conversations for the last years.
Yeah, no, I think the new construction obviously lends itself to more standardized approaches and potentially some consolidated procurement opportunities. Whereas, renovations and or remediations are so site specific, I think it'd be difficult to do those at scale.
Okay, thanks. Yes, Representative Burkhardt.
Michael, when you were here last time, you mentioned that in your travels, as you were looking at other states' school construction programs, none of the other states that you came across had as restrictive a foundation formula as the one that we are considering. Could you just say another word about that? You talk a little bit about what you learned about other states' foundation formulas and how they interact with school construction.
Yeah, and granted, I'm doing my best to become expert on this subject. My real area of expertise is on forms of state credit enhancement for school districts and debt issuance. But as we've been having these conversations, I've certainly tried to get smart on other ways in which construction aid interacts with foundation formulas. And I'm not aware of other states that have as hard a cap. Typically, there's some method of local share via, property tax increases to sort of accommodate excess spending, if you will, to use our Vermont terms. Now, in some states, property tax increases are limited by sort of taxpayer Bill of Rights considerations where, it's limited to inflation or 2.5% or something like that. So that does provide a cap in some ways, but typically there's a workaround with a general referendum process to get over that cap. But generally there's sort of a relief valve of property tax increases in many of the states I've looked at to date.
Thank you. Yeah, Representative Bodie.
Well, since that, what would you say we have to think about if our cap is possibly one that others don't have? What do you think we should be?
Yeah, I think you have all been having those discussions, and that's one reason you're talking about levels of state support that are higher than what is in current law, which I think, if I recall, was like 20 to 40%. You've been talking about state support well in excess of that, and I think that's the way you might be able to overcome that. And then, of course, risk transfer of some of the unknown aspects of school construction, which is project delivery date, construction costs, escalations. And so those are also ways to control the cost and budgetary implications for schools, which gets more to the centralized procurement conversation we've been having.
All possible for you, and if it's not, to give me an example with numbers where you say greater than the 20 to 40% state support at that level. Can you just say, oh, here's how it would look before the foundation formula, here's how it would look with our current foundation formula, here's how it would look with greater than 20 to 40%. You know what I mean? I need something to compare.
I'm not. Could you give me a little bit more clarity? I'm not sure I totally understand.
Well, I hear you saying how what we're doing is more restrictive than other states. what we're looking at for our foundation formula, what do you think would be less restrictive and still fair and still, we were gonna put this together, get this written out?
Oh yeah, I'm not sure exactly. I mean, I think the relevant factors in that decision are that the foundation formula, I think JFO had indicated there's like $120 million or so of costs that aren't accounted for in the foundation formula, including transportation and capital, and then uh state by state comparisons, rating agency data indicate that kind of a steady state of debt service for school districts of the size that we're talking about in a future state in Vermont is around 5.5% of budget. So I think those give you some ways in which you can back into what the appropriate level of state support would be. The $1 billion question, of course, is what is the size of our capital need.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't personally back into that. I have.
I know, so today is all about, like, there's a lot of different puzzle pieces. There's definitely pieces of the puzzle that are missing from the stack of testimony, including the question of how much money do we actually need to do this well? We're not going to answer that question today, but at least we're going to put all the pieces, as many pieces of the puzzle as we have on the table.
All right, if I see some examples, then I'll say,
Yes. Well, we have an example coming up in the form. Nope, not quite yet. Next, we're going to hear from the state treasurer's office. If they're ready. Okay, cool. If you could join us. Whichever one of you wants to. I absolutely do not mind if you do both. I would love if you both testify. That'd be thrilling. And after them, we'll have an example from Colchester, Representative Odie. Floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. For the record, David Scher, Deputy Treasurer, and
Scott Baker, Director of Debt Management.
you want to just take a minute to explain a little bit about what you do, and then I'll dive into a couple points.
Yeah, so I basically handle the state bond issues. So anything that goes in the capital bill, we issue general obligation bonds and that's yeah. So we borrow money, issue bonds. That's what we do. So
Great, thank you.
So just as part of that, because we just heard from the bond bank, how does what you do differ from what the bond bank does? If you could just explain further.
yeah, so what we do, and anything that goes into the capital bill, capital projects that the state is funding, we issue the general obligation bonds for. The bond bank loans to municipalities and school districts. So they go through the bond bank. Collectively, bond bank will issue one bond and, loan it out to those individual school districts or towns. So.
These are general obligation bonds, theirs are not.
Correct. Everything we have right now are general obligation bonds. We have in the past issued transportation infrastructure bonds. We did 3 series from 2010 to 2013, and there's a tax assessment on gas and diesel fuel. There was a portion, those revenues went to pay debt service on those bonds. So those were special revenue bonds. But everything else we do with general obligation bonds, which means payable from any of the state funds that we have.
How much debt capacity, we actually coincidentally have the capital bill in the committee later this afternoon. But how much debt capacity does the state have right now that we're not using?
So right now we have about 547 million bonds outstanding. We have another 192 million of bonds that are authorized but unissued. So any projects that have been appropriated within the capital bill, when we go out to bond, we work with finance and management. We survey all of the departments and recipients of the funds, find out when they expect to spend the money, and we will go out and bond for either money that has already been spent or that they expect to spend in the next 6 or 12 months or whatever. And we will bond for that amount. For projects that have appropriations but aren't going to spend for a while, we will not bond for those. So that money's been appropriated to projects but not bonded for, so that's called authorized but unissued debt. So if everything was going out right now, we'd have 192 million more of outstanding debt.
And then how much? What debt capacity do we have that is not authorized nor issued, but is possible or advisable from the bond oversight committee that I can't remember the acronym for?
You didn't see that?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So the CDAC committee, the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee, meets annually and looks at debt, comes up with debt metrics. They assess and come up with an amount that can be prudently issued and recommends to the governor and the legislature how much we can do. And what they do is benchmark to AAA rated states. So Vermont is one notch below that, AA plus, with 2 rating agencies, AA1 with Moody's. Again, that's the second highest rating, so our bonds are well received. We get good interest rates, low borrowing costs. CDAC will go through analyze the debt metrics, come up with some numbers. They set some guidelines and issue an amount for biennial issuance. This year, for the 2026, 2027 amount, they came up with $100 million or about $50 million per year. And that was constrained by a few factors. One, because we have so much authorized but unissued, we have federal money, which we're still trying to spend. There are projects that can't get done just because there aren't enough people to build the projects or supply shortages or whatnot. So they came up with the 50 million. They also did an analysis analyzing $86 million per year. And that was based on the administration's 10-year capital plan, how much they expect to spend over the next 10 years. That amount stayed within the debt metric guidelines. So we could do that amount. Again, they stayed at 50 million just because there was testimony that we just couldn't spend that amount in the next couple of years. We had our financial advisor run some scenarios
Did
and.
my question jump ahead of your plan for?
No, this is fine.
Okay, cool. Okay. Great.
And we could realistically probably do an extra 50 million on top of what CDAC recommends. And
Per year.
per year, right? And anything above that, we rely on the rating agency.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rating. We don't, they're formulas, but there's some judgment on their part too. So you can't just, it's hard to know exactly what would happen, but we don't want to issue too much debt. And if with lower ratings, our borrowing costs go up.
Mhm.
We also have agencies that use the moral obligation of the state, like VHFA and BSAC and the bond bank. Their rates are directly tied to our ratings as well. So that would raise borrowing costs for them as well.
And a special revenue bond, would that be a separate set of capacity that you'd have to have separate conversations about?
So the TIBs, the transportation bonds that we did issue, the rating agencies do look at that as net tax supported debt. So
Okay.
that would kind of go under the same umbrella
Okay.
issue.
Even if there was a new revenue source attached to it? Which I'm not putting on the table. I'm just asking hypothetical questions, everyone.
Yeah,
Just trying to understand.
yeah, we were hoping that it wouldn't go as net tax supported debt. It is a special revenue, and the ratings on that is probably a notch below the GEO bond
Okay.
rating as well, because it's not a guarantee. It's based on whatever we collect in those gas taxes.
Thank you. That's helpful. What else did you want to tell us?
I had a few just high level points of thinking broadly about policy, not anything in great detail or length, but I know that the committee's been talking about as is often the case in the past and future. So looking at legacy debt, I think the treasurer's basic stance on that is that if the legislature is willing to take on that, that burden and, the outstanding construction debt service are numbers that I know, I believe the committee has, but next year it would be something like 61 million and goes down from there. That's certainly something the legislature could choose to do if they're willing and able to support that. I strongly supports queuing as closely as possible to the Rhode Island model, which has been mentioned already by Michael Gahn, and I believe we have somebody here who'd be able to talk about it in much more detail. But that would be a method which would increase the likelihood that outstanding debt service would not be counted as net tax supported debt, which is what would be counted as against our rating. And Scott, step in whenever I say something incorrect, but using that model would make it less likely that would impact our overall bond rating. There's no guarantee on that. But that they would strongly support using that as a model for those reimbursements, but understanding the legislature would have to be ready to make those payments, wouldn't be as supportive of issuing debt to support that debt. That would be.
A little bit of a shell game.
Yeah.
Because then the question comes, what is the source of the 20 to 40% to service that debt? Is it still the education fund, which is property taxes?
For looking back for the legacy.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the big question.
Right.
We have an answer to that.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure I didn't miss something.
The legislature would have to be prepared to take on it in some way. Looking forward, again, I think I know the treasurer is supportive of thinking about this through the lens of the Rhode Island model for supporting future school construction. His view is that we do need, that it would be probably unique and very challenging, unique and maybe not unique, but close to unique to take on 100% of future school construction. And he does believe that there would need to be some local support for school construction. There would have to be some payments coming from the local districts in order to support that. Understanding the foundation model restricts the amount available and the ways in which that, it makes it a little challenging. That would have to come under assessment as to whether or not that is doable, or is there other revenues that districts could be empowered to levy. Those would be questions that I think the legislature would have to take under advisement, but his view is that you would need to have some. It would make more sense for there to be some local input, local revenues that would have to go in to support future school construction, in part also to make sure that the money the state spends is really going a reasonable distance in terms of supporting a number of different projects. Obviously, there's a large, as this committee's discussed, there's a large number of deferred maintenance and capital needs, but starting is important. Not everything is going to happen all at once. And I think that is a useful way to think about it, which is that if you do a bit at a time and then, moving forward, that makes it more doable to tackle the problem. It's not all going to be, not all the money would likely be able to be on the table at once to solve the entire deferred maintenance challenge.
Representative Holcomb.
Just tell us, and you may have already said this, but what was the cost of the bond downgrades in 18 and 19?
Cost of.
What was that? What was the impact of those downgrades in 2018 and 19 on our borrowing costs?
I typically a downgrade, it might cost, 25 basis points, whatever. Although we're, a notch below AAA, the last two bond issues that we've had, we actually traded better than some of the AAA states that went out around the same time. Part of it, we don't have a lot of issuances, so there's a high demand for it. It's still a high credit state. It's difficult to tell from issue to issue, but the last two issues that we did pretty much traded like a AAA. Doesn't mean it always will, but
Or something.
Yeah, we're trying to use the word back in, but you part it back into an answer to what I have having to do with capacity. Which is, as we know, there's a whole lot of unmet need out there in many schools that have been waiting and waiting and waiting. What sort of process would there be if a whole bunch of schools came online at once and said, we need that? I mean, that's basically a local decision making, and you found in your inbox requests for huge amounts of money, far beyond what you would say is could match our capacity. What sort of process might we end up with?
That's a great question. I think that had to be something that we would establish in statute or rule. I don't have a complete answer for you now. I think you'd have to have a variety of different metrics, including like how close a project is to being able to start. You know, whether there's local support, either by vote or some other measure. And so I think there'd be a variety of different metrics you'd have to assess that by, but I don't have a full answer. It's a great
Well, I mean,
question.
that's very, very adequate, better than adequate. It's a very good answer. And I'm also amazed when you guys come in and sit down and let council people come in and sit down. Invariably, they say, that's a great question. And I'm sure some of the time, they may roll their eyes and say, when is it? But I mean, literally, you guys are remarkable on what you do, and I appreciate it. And you answered as well as you could for what's available. Is what so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. I promise there's no internal eye roll.
No,
Anyway,
to put people through a lot of paces, I think, just trying to do our jobs. But thank you.
Thank you.
You can roll your eyes.
Yes, no, we're not making that a theme, folks.
I have one more question, and it may be too early, but have you seen any change in interest in bonding in the last, in response to some of the national events and international events?
Interest on the part of.
Are you seeing people are moving ahead with bonds? Are you seeing growing caution? What are you starting to see in terms of people looking to do big projects?
Yeah, I think it depends on the need, the timing. The bond bank just did an issue. And actually, I think they were pricing right before all the tensions in the Middle East started. And so I know they paid a few basis points higher than when they were projecting, but they've gone up since then. So I'm guessing we're kind of waiting a little bit right now.
Representative Bigley.
Thank you. Could you go over one more time? I think I heard you say that you have the ability every year for 50 million to 80 million, but then you also said you could possibly double that in the 50 million range. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the recommendation, the 2-year recommendation was 100 million or 50 million per year. And when CDAC ran the scenarios, they also they go through projections, and there's several projections they run and see where the debt metrics go and what can be issued. They did run scenarios at 86 million. And again, that was based on 10-year projections from the administration, the capital needs. So they did look at those scenarios. Subsequently, when we were talking about school construction and running some scenarios, the financial advisor ran some scenarios and projected that we could issue about $50 million per year on top of our current, well, not on top of the 86, but on top of the 50.
This year?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it'd be a total of 100 a year.
Right.
So Scott, were you working in the treasurer's office when we used to have state aid for school construction?
I started right after that.
Okay, all right. So I just want to make sure I remember correctly that in the before times, when there was still state aid for school construction, it might be 20% of whatever school project is issued in the bonds that are issued by the state. But that would be provided to those school districts without the expectation they would have to repay it, because the interest is being repaid by the general fund at that time. Am I remembering it correctly?
I believe that, I think those went through the capital bill.
Okay.
And so it was 20% subsidy, and I think it was about $10 million a year that equated to.
Yeah.
Okay, but the interest still was being paid by the general fund and not
Right.
by the school districts.
Right.
Okay.
Wait a second. I thought you said.
No, yeah, so it was paid by the general fund, the interest on those.
General fund paid the interest, and what was the note? Cap.
So anything in the capital bill, we issue general obligation bonds, so that basically the general fund.
Thank you both. Really appreciate your time on this and all the other conversations related to this. One thing I'd love for us all to be thinking about is how do we make sure that we are citing schools where they're needed, not just where there's willingness to take on debt? And so I think that's a really hard question, given all the fiscal pieces, and I don't want anyone to sort of answer it today. I just want to make sure that it's built into whatever we're doing going forward. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Speaking of a willingness to take on debt, hey, Colchester. So
Hi.
glad you could join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And I'm really particularly glad that you're here because I have always thought of you, and I imagine you think of yourselves as a quite fiscally conservative district, actually.
We do. We do.
So tell us all about it, please.
Awesome. So I am going to share my screen if I can. We have a really short presentation. I thought it would be helpful for you all to know just a little bit of history of the bond and why we went this road.
I think you have permission now. Thank you.
Great. Can you see my first slide?
We can.
Okay, great. So we prepped in 2023 a facilities bond for the Colchester School District. We called it Our Towns, Our Schools, Our Future. And our rationale around the bond, like many schools in Vermont, our schools were aging. And so our two oldest schools were built in the 50s. Both of those buildings were having significant ventilation, heat, and one of them was having a significant septic issue. Our Mount Bay School was built in 62, the middle school was built in 68, and the high school was built in 74. And so from our perspective, the three buildings that needed the most renovations are the two elementary schools, Union Memorial and Porter's Point School, built in the 50s, and Colchester Middle School, which was built in 1968. You can see that Union, Porter's, and Mallett's Bay School did have some renovations done to those buildings, and that's because those buildings expanded as the population of students grew in the town of Colchester. The middle school really has had no renovations since it opened. So this wasn't a quick decision to go to bond. This work predates 2013. And in 2013, the board really talked with themselves and with administration around a long-term facilities plan because they were starting to see that deferred maintenance was taking a toll, and some of the things that needed to be replaced or renovated were at costs that would be outside of the normal operational budget. The superintendent before me, which was Larry Waters, in 2015 launched a early education committee. Our preschool program, we really wanted to get that off the ground, but there was not space in any of the school buildings to do that. So this committee thought about, okay, Porter's and Union is aging. Our preschool program is located in Mallett's Bay School, which is a grades 3, 4, 5 building. Can we talk about a facilities renovation that will find a true home for our preschool program? So that committee was launched, and between 2015, 2016, 2017, the timing just didn't feel right from an economic standpoint to put a bond on the ballot. I became superintendent in 2016, and it was one of the goals of the school board was to create a long-term facilities plan because we just continued, like many other districts, to see a significant amount of deferred maintenance. And so the need was there based on the state of our facilities. The board did a lot of work. We did community engagement, and our bond was set to go on the ballot November of 2020. And so we all remember what happened in 2020, and our bond didn't go on the ballot, and we had to take a pause. And, for many reasons, post-COVID ability to construction crews, we waited until the winter of 2023 when it sounded like if we were to eventually find some dollars to do significant renovation, construction costs had come down by then, crew availability was a little bit easier. So in the winter of 2023, we hired the Center for Effective School Operations, known as CESO, to help us with our community engagement plan. And when we hired them late fall, early winter, we weren't sure if we were going to put the bond on a March ballot or a November ballot. And so we got some feedback from them around what worked in other states and some feedback from the community. And ultimately, the decision was made that it would be on the November 2024 ballot. In retrospect now, maybe the March 24 ballot would have helped us out a lot more, but through that engagement process, that's what we decided. And the community was really behind us with what they were seeing. They saw the need with the infrastructure, with the limited space that we had in some of our school buildings, and just the state of the middle school. I would say our middle school is really needing some significant renovations. So when we talked to the community about our renovation project, safety and security was one of the number one reasons. We heard from many outside sources and assessments that we had when they audited our buildings around our infrastructure in those buildings had outlived their useful life. And that's when we're talking about roofs and windows and plumbing, electrical, and the HVAC system. None of the buildings that we're looking to really tend to with this bond have a strong heating and cooling system. None of them have air conditioners, so we're putting AC units in windows. And then we were short some significant learning spaces. Our elementary schools do not have gyms. It's the cafeteria. And so there was lots of reasons for need. I could talk hours about why, and I have lots of pictures, but I won't share those today unless you want me to come back and do that, because I know we want to talk about how we're funding it. But I wanted to give you the overview and the history of how we got here, because it wasn't a quick process. And the process came out of our students need strong facilities, and our facilities are failing. So
in the lead up to all of that, had you all been able to put sufficient money aside for ongoing maintenance? Or did you have a lot of deferred maintenance?
we had a lot of deferred maintenance. George will talk about this, but if you look back like the past 20 years, Colchester has been well below the statewide average in per pupil spending. And when you compare our per pupil spending dollar amount with the other schools in Chittenden County, it was typical for us to be the lowest or the second lowest spending school.
Yeah.
Just a couple times in recent years were we the third lowest spending school within our region. And because of that, you know, we weren't putting a lot of money in kind of the maintenance line, because historically passing school budgets in Colchester was challenging. You know, we had many years where there were 3 budget votes. And so it was something that our board really made sure we took really strong care of our buildings, but it was hitting the point where we were starting to see systems fail. And there just wasn't enough dollars in the operational budget in order to do things like HVAC, redoing the plumbing system of a building, redoing the electrical system of a building. Those types of systems is what we're talking about really needing to be replaced.
Thanks.
We did go through the formal process with the Agency of Education to have our project approved before it was placed on the ballot. And so we worked with Bob Donahue. It was a significant amount of work, traffic studies, septic study, the audits from VSBA around the state of our building facilities, which really all pointed to our facilities needed greater work than what we could provide through the operational budget. And so we got that approval on October 14th of 2024. And then we put our facilities bond on the ballot on November 5th, and it was approved by our voters. And so we were really excited about that. But I think that date is really important, and knowing that we had been working on this for years, because we are just 4 months outside of that July 1 of 2024 date. And schools like Winooski, Fairfax, and Burlington, they are within that date. And so it's something that we're asked frequently about. Same year, we were close, but not quite close enough. So our bond is a 30-year bond. The total dollar amount in our bond is $115 million. That our projects will, we've started, and so we broke ground on the Porter's Point School construction this fall, so fall of 2025. We are hoping that all of our projects will be complete by 2030. And the three schools that are getting the largest funds from the bond are Porter's Point School, which is currently a K-2 school, Union Memorial School, which is currently a K-2 school. Those two buildings are getting a new addition, and we are kind of tearing off half of the building to turn that into a parking lot and a safe bus route, because that's one of the challenges of both of those buildings. It's a safety concern that we have. And part of what is being added to those buildings is preschool. Because preschool is currently not located at Porter's and Union. And so those students and those families have to transition twice. They transition into Mallets Bay School, a grades 3, 4, 5 school for preschool, and then they transition to Porter's and Union. So those two schools are significant. Colchester Middle School is the other school that it's getting a significant portion of the bonds. And that's our school that has not had any renovations. And that school is grades 6, 7, and 8. Sorry, I think someone had a question.
You should keep it going.
Okay. When we promoted the bond with the community, we talked about doing the HVAC at Mallets Bay School and a couple of projects at Colchester High School, so that all 5 schools in the district would benefit from some portion of the bond. We don't have dates or specifics on those yet because we need to move through those first 3 projects first to see where we are. What's important about the Mallets Bay School project is HVAC is definitely needed there. Preschool takes up one of the wings of Mallets Bay School, which has typically been one of the grades. Because we were invested in having preschool in the district, we needed to find space. So we made classrooms larger at Mallets Bay School. At Mallets Bay School, currently my class size there ranges from 23 to 26. And so we will, Mallets Bay School will take that wing back. It's much needed space right now. We have offices on the stage. We've converted some closets into small workspaces for students with special educators. And so space is a big need there as well. But that's kind of the overview of what's being done in the project. I'm going to turn it over to George, who's going to talk about the repayment schedule and some other financials.
Yeah, sure. So I won't get too far down into the weeds here because it actually started with a really excellent explanation of how it would work for Colchester without the numbers, how the per pupil spending would work, how it would increase the homestead tax rate, how it would apply to the excess spending threshold. And all you were lacking during that conversation was the numbers. So you can see here with this table, Amy mentioned that for the 20 years I've been here, we've always been a low spending district on a per pupil basis in Chittenden County. And you can see how per pupil spending would go from about $14,403 in fiscal 26 to $19,108 in fiscal 29, which is the high point of our bond debt repayment. And so essentially, as we include the principal and interest payments as we ramp up these projects, we go from being one of the lowest spending districts in Chittenden County to becoming more of a high spending district in Chittenden County. The bond debt payments right now in fiscal 26 is about $1.6 million. It reaches its peak in fiscal 29 of about $9.3 million. And you can see how the spending per pupil would change somewhat if the bond debt was excluded for Colchester. That's the 3rd line down, where the actual spending per pupil would be reduced to $13,961, and in fiscal 29 it would be reduced down to $16,514. The bond debt right now represents about 2.5% of our overall spending plan. And when we reach the peak, it's going to represent just over 11%.
And what I hear you saying is that you're not planning on reducing spending in order to make up for the increase in debt. It's just, it will increase your overall spending.
No, that's not what I said at all. Actually,
Okay,
we will, of course, look every year, as we did this year with our budget that passed, at making some adjustments and reductions where they make sense. This year, with the budget the board put forward had over $1 million in reductions. So,
okay.
of course, we'll look at that. But I'm not even going to pretend that we'll be able to in fiscal 28 reduce enough in our overall operating budget to, cover even half of fiscal 28's bond debt of 7.4 million, excuse me. So while we're always looking to do some adjustments, these numbers grow over the next 3 years, and we won't be able to fully offset that. That's not possible.
Our board has always been committed to looking each year for efficiencies. And so it's not uncommon for us to make some reductions and do a review of programming in every budget cycle. I think when you're looking at those numbers and you're trying to figure out, okay, so how much then do you need to cut to cover that bond payment? If you just think about that from a teacher perspective, you could roughly estimate between 8 to 10 teachers is $1 million. And so to cover that 7 million in FY28, if you just did that with teachers, knowing that our class size is really close or in some grade levels slightly over the EQS, it would mean a significant reduction of programs or very, very large class sizes, well above 25 per class.
And I'm not asking because I think it's a good idea. I'm more trying to understand if you did so much communication in your district in the lead up to this bond.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if you feel like it's your community's expectation that per pupil spending will be higher for the next 30 years, or if they're going to be expecting you to somehow miraculously keep it where it was, even though they voted yes on a bond.
Yeah.
And I know that's a big question. You don't have to answer it now, but I think it's sort of at the crux of some of what we're going to be wrestling with.
Yeah, and I thank you for asking that question. And I just think the perspective is, important when you're looking at the numbers to know like what that potential impact would be as we make some really difficult decisions over the next, 3 to 5 fiscal years. All right, so George's going to talk about just the overall budget impact.
Yeah, so I've covered the first bullet, which basically is saying that we've been a low spending district on a per pupil basis, below the statewide average, one of the lowest in Chittenden County. That's certainly going to change. And going back to the exclusion of the bond debt, our biggest concern is bumping up against the excess spending threshold. Which was a discussion we had with the board and with the community to partially answer the question you just had about knowing that the addition of bond debt, if we don't have the ability to exclude it, will start to push us closer to the excess spending threshold where there could be some additional penalty taxes as a result.
Here is a picture of what the Portage Point School renovation looks like currently. We've toured Burlington High School and we've toured Winooski, and seeing what we're about to do at Portage Point School, it really, I think, is going to result in a transformation of what students are currently experiencing in a building that was built in the 50s. And I do think it's going to bring us some economic efficiencies because it will be a much more efficient building than what we have right now in place. That is my entire presentation. So I will stop screen sharing here and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
So Amy, I have a couple questions It's Charlie Kimball. I'm wondering first, in terms of the process you went through with Bob Donahue and the Agency of Education for getting the preliminary approval, wondering what you think the benefit of doing that was at this point and how that might apply to what you're thinking about in terms of your spending versus qualified expenses, that type of stuff.
You know, I think one of the reasons we did talk about should we do that or should we not do that? It was an extensive process, but I do think it was worth it to get kind of an outside eye reflection around the scope of what we are building. And if school construction aid ever came back, we wanted to do that because we would hope that we would be kind of grandfathered in to that program. Several years ago, I remember knowing that there was a moratorium on school construction. There was a kind of feeling that, so it's on local voters and local school boards to take care of your school buildings. And so our board did exactly that with no moratorium and seeing that there are aging facilities. It truly is the community's responsibility to do what they need to do to take care of those. And I think we've been good stewards of our buildings, getting them to this point. You know, the high school was built in 74, and I think that's got it's going to be a long time before we need to do anything significant there because we've taken such good care of it. But I think that is our hope, right? That we would be grandfathered into a school construction process with the state if there were to be funding because we went through that pre-approval process. That's our hope.
And of the $115 million, how much of that was deemed to be qualified? So there are eligible construction expenses. So was it all the 115 million of it, or was it a percentage of that?
90 million.
90 million. Okay. And my only last question is, how many students are in your school district?
Great question. We have been 2,100 students since 2009. And so our enrollment is stable and strong. Our demographer is predicting that our enrollment will continue to rise because we've had so much development in Colchester, and another large development is planned.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
When you said that 90 million was qualified, the rules that and maybe this is a question more for the AOE, the rules that were used to say that that was qualified, were those the old rules from the previous program, or are these new rules that have already been put in place?
I think that would be a great question for the AOE. My understanding it was the existing rules that Bob was using. And so I'm not sure if they were old or if they've been revised.
Okay. And this is a detailed question, if I may. How is the interest rate structured on your bond? Is it a floating or is it fixed? And do you happen to know what that number is?
It's fixed and it's about 4.4.
Okay.
And just to clarify, we've only drawn down a portion of our 115 million.
Yeah.
So we've drawn down $30 million, and we'll continue to space that out based on how the project schedule goes.
Thank you.
Amy, ballpark, do you know how many of that 2,100 district-wide students-ish, how many are in each of your schools?
Yeah, there's approximately 220 at Porters and Union without preschool, because preschool is not in there right now. About 550 at Mallets Bay, about 630 at Colchester Middle School, and we're about 740, I think, at the high school, roughly.
Thank you. And Mallets Bay serves which grades again?
Right now, Mallets Bay School serves ages 3, 4, 5 and grades 3, 4, 5. Once the project is done, Mallets Bay School will only be grades 3, 4, 5, and then Porters and Union will take on the 3, 4, and 5-year-olds.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much for your time today and for all the work you're doing. Really appreciate it. Wow. Yes, we have a question.
So let's just say that the new construction aid formula comes into effect in 4 years, whatever. The point of the question is this: what would you want to be part of, want to be grandfathered in? How would you want to be repaid for the money that you've paid so far, so that you come out as though you know, you started early, somebody else is gonna start in 10 years. Would you want to have it clock back to when you started so that you get the same benefit, even though you started earlier?
Great question. I mean, we will take those dollars any way that we can. I will be as flexible as
Say no,
possible.
say no.
Well, if that were to be, what amount would you, what, would it be just the same percentage and then you just look at what you spent in each of the years? How would you say that?
Yeah, I think I might say something like our hope would be that we would be, we would receive revenue for what we were approved through the AOE 4. That would be a great hope. How the funds trickle back into the district, I think I'll leave that up to the legislature, but knowing that it'll be 30 years for us to buy down, it would be prudent to pay that down sooner so that we're paying less interest. It would save everybody. You know, how can we do that in a way that saves taxpayers the most dollars possible?
Thank you, Amy.
Yep. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna take a brief pause for agenda clarity. We have moved the capital bill to tomorrow morning. We've moved the special education testimony to later in the afternoon. And I skipped Jamie Bauer on the agenda. I'm so sorry. Would you like to join us? And please come on. And you're both welcome to sit together, or just one of you, whatever works better for you. So folks, one of the pieces of this all that we need to figure out is as school buildings stop being used for schools, what happens to those buildings? How do we help communities see that as an asset rather than something else? And so we have invited the land bank crew to talk to us about it.
Thank you. If you could show our presentation, my computer was making all those wonky noises and.
And just to introduce ourselves, my name is Sean Gilpin. I'm a director of the Housing Division at the Department of Housing and Community Development. I'm hereby.
I'm Jamie. I am also with the Housing Division. I'm helping steer the land bank work, and I'm also assisting with Homes for All as well as other programs and initiatives.
Yeah, wear lots of hats. So
yes,
yeah, I'll turn it over. Jamie's been the spearhead on this one with plenty of experience from past lives and
yes,
that she's bringing to bear for the state of Vermont.
yes, and we'll try to be a little quick because I know it's running late. So if we can go to the next slide. Just for context, how we got here in 2024, the legislature asked us to do a feasibility study on whether or not we could benefit from having a land bank. We turned that in January 2025. In the last session, we were asked to create a tactical plan and draft legislation. That's due on November 1 of this year, and we submitted a kind of a progress report in January. And what is a land bank? A land bank is a nonprofit entity accountable to the public. They make decisions that are based on community benefit, not on profitability necessarily. I will give you some examples. I hail to you from Cleveland, Ohio. Was in community development for over 20 years, 10 years of those with a nonprofit. Worked a lot with the Cuyahoga County Land Bank, a really premier land bank in the country. We were able to take 65 vacant and abandoned houses, repurpose them, put them back into the hands of homeowners. We were able to save a church. We were able to save a dry cleaner. We were able to create a park out of a landfill. So they really can take part in helping any type of land in meeting any of the community goals. What a land bank can do, one of the big things they can do is they can wipe back taxes, they can wipe liens, they can clean up titles. So for the dry cleaner scenario, it would have been vacant for 30 years. It had $30,000 worth of back taxes. It had mechanics liens and grass cutting liens from the city, and it had a cloudy title. So when we had a business who wanted it, The land bank was able to take it, clean all that up. They helped us get a phase 1 and phase 2 testing. They helped us with meeting with the EPA, and then they turned around and sold it to that business for $3,000, and the business invested $800,000 into that building. I should have also said most of what land banks deal with are vacant and abandoned properties. They mostly do not deal with anything that's occupied.
Yeah, it's largely dealing with challenge issues, things that nobody else wants to touch, that the private market doesn't want to touch because it's too complicated.
Yeah.
And in many cases, as Jamie will get to, municipalities might not even have the capacity to deal with.
And even with like the case with the lawn or dry cleanup scenario, the business wanted it, but they couldn't get it because their title was messed up, their back taxes. So sometimes a land bank just needs to go in and do that to make something a viable project. What we found when we did the feasibility study was we talked to multiple for-profit and not-profit developers, asking them what their challenges were with trying to bring it back, vacant and abandoned properties back to life. Again, cloudy titles and tax delinquency. Many of our small communities are all volunteer or only one staffer, so they don't have capacity to deal with that terrible property that's been hanging out for 20 years. And we were also told that we have a lot of the pieces at different organizations, but putting it all together is like trying to put a puzzle together. So it takes a lot more time and a lot less efficient. So next slide. Thank you. Progress report highlights. We've been working with a working group of professionals all across the state in housing and community development and advocacy. One of the things we totally agree with, land bank activities should primarily be locally driven and keep it in keeping with their goals. I think we can, just for some time. All right, how they can help small communities. They can hold property while communities go through an assessment process. They can assist with submitting applications for grant dollars. They can be the fiscal agent. They can help with project management. They can help with helping to find or select a contractor, just all the kind of technical things that these little communities just might not have the capacity to do. And the next slide. All right, repurposing school buildings. So in most, across the country, most standard classrooms are around 700 to 900 square feet, which would be a 1-bedroom apartment or maybe a small 2-bedroom apartment. In 2022, the Secretary of Education submitted a study to the legislature. They did a survey of all the schools. I think it was 390, I think that's all of them. Based on their results, our average size of a school is about 44,700 or almost 45,000. A 45,000 square foot school typically has 20 to 25 classrooms. So, and the average cost to convert classrooms to apartments is about 200 to 250 per unit, compared to building a new apartment in Vermont is between 300 or up above 500,000.
Ask a question.
Yes.
On that, sorry, so it's on that last slide. The cost.
Brought up Barry, man. Come on.
I know, she's also a constituent, so there's a Ward 5 school is now an apartment building. We should all do a tour.
Yeah.
The cost to convert classrooms to apartments, being around 200 to 250, does that assume that like the nuts and bolts of the building are strong? Like, you know.
Definitely.
I think you know what I meant.
Yeah, so it can vary, I think that assumes that it's been vacant for some time, but maybe not as long as Ward 5 school,
Yeah.
which was 10 years, which we can get into. It can also depend on the location and infrastructure, but in general, rehabbing an existing building is less expensive than building a new building. So I don't know if that answered it or not.
Okay.
Yeah, so we are repurposing. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Representative Odie, I shouldn't have let, one second, I'm sorry. I'm gonna let you finish your testimony and then we're gonna ask questions.
Okay, so we are doing some of this work. This is a building in Barry. This is a recent project. It was just finished last year. It's a smaller school. It had been vacant for over 10 years. It was not in good condition. The total investment to create 9 affordable apartments was about $10 million. The Vermont Rehab Investment Tax Credit is really the housing preservation tax credit, and they gave about $2 million towards the project, and they got additional funding through VHFA, VHCB, CDBG money, ARPA money, so just a whole funding stack. It's a great project. This one was done in 2022. It's a larger school. It was in much better condition. It had only been vacant for about 1.5 years. It was Heart of Mary School of Immaculate is a very long name. And then they created 19 affordable apartments, a total of investment of about 6.5 million. In this scenario, the tax credit investment was 1 million, and they also received funding from all the different varieties of sources that funding is provided. And we also, just yesterday, we had our working group had employees from the Maine Land Bank at our meeting. The Maine Land Bank is new. It stood up in 20.
In the state, not primary.
Yes, Maine, State of Maine Land Bank Authority. Sorry.
Oh, it's fine.
They were stood up in 2024. They are providing technical assistance to 3 communities to help them repurpose their school. They're working on doing what they're calling a toolkit. The state of Maine legislature has a bill that they're considering to create annual funding of 5 million to convert schools to housing units. 5 million would convert a 45,000 square foot school at 200 per unit. So approximately 1 school in Vermont a year would be with 5 million. This is just a really beautiful project. It's in Atlanta, Georgia. It had sat vacant for decades. It's now with 8 million investment, live workspace for artists and crafters, creative people. And last but not least, next steps. We are going to be providing the legislature with a tactical plan and enabling legislation in November. Our working group meets on the last Monday at 2:00 every month. Everybody is invited. If you would like a link to come join one of our discussions, please contact me. We would love to have you. So, yeah. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, I will, if I may, just thank you, Jamie. I do want to applaud Jamie. It's been a very a lot of outreach and a lot of interaction with everybody from the RDCs to a huge litany of different folks, VHCB and the like have been in there. A lot of municipalities, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns has been involved in this conversation. All the examples in Vermont have been done without a land bank. However, we imagine that those type of projects could be much more easily achieved if we had that sort of mechanism.
Yep.
So we look forward to providing some guidance for you all to engage in on the next session. But in the meantime, yeah, if there are boisterous conversations every end of the month.
Senator, do you still have a question?
Yeah, I do. The rehab for existing costs is less than opening a new building. That's for going to apartments. Would that also be for rehabbing for school purpose, or do you not?
I mean, I guess that's in general, it is less expensive to rehab than to build. I can find
I'm
out.
gonna take testimony from folks about repurposing for schools.
Thank you, I love it.
Yeah. Can you help me understand what a land bank would do that one of the housing trusts doesn't?
Yes, absolutely.
I imagine you've gotten that question before.
Yes,
Okay.
for example, there's a few different powers with the right legislation. One is cleaning up back taxes. They wipe them away.
So you forgive them?
They forgive them.
Okay. Where does
So in most of
where does the lost revenue?
So let me, just for the record, most of these buildings have been vacant for years and years and years. You're not going to collect those taxes.
Okay.
You know, they're just sitting there fallow.
Yeah.
So by cleaning up those taxes, you're recreating an opportunity actually to be able to collect taxes on that building.
But does the land bank pay the town for the taxes?
That is something that they could, well, they will pay the town for the taxes.
Would they pay the state for the taxes? You can answer that some other time then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but they can also clean up cloudy titles, like if you have this is especially true with vacant commercial buildings, you'll have somebody die, 5 people inherit it, 2 don't know, 1 doesn't care, like, and so to try to bring it back to use, you really need to be able to do that. Land banks can hold property, contaminated property with limited liability, like BRELA has the powers to do. If they can, we're not sure if we want to recommend this, but many land banks issue bonds. They can act as fiscal agents for municipalities. So just a variety of different things. There is some crossover with what RPCs and RUCs do. I would view the land bank as being able to help with the capacity that they can't already do, but there's a lot of projects that aren't getting done because there's not the capacity to do it, right? So.
I would say one, it's largely a legal entity and a legal mechanism to try to free up some of these, legal issues. One of the other major things that a land bank is able to do is act as a third party so that you don't, and we intentionally pulled this slide out because it got a little into the weeds, but to avoid what the feds call choice limiting factors. So if somebody wants to get HUD grants to go in and do some housing construction, they can't necessarily have already purchased the building because HUD considers that as limiting their choices. Similarly, frankly, for FEMA buyouts, there's opportunity for this to stand in as an intermediary for those sort of things, to buy a little time and make sure that a developer can come in and do their work.
Right, we really think the flood relief and the small communities could be the biggest beneficiaries. I know in Barry, we've got 45 properties that want buyouts. It creates a terrible situation of pitting a city against its residents and the residents against its city. A land bank can purchase those properties that might not be able to reuse some portion of it, but it's not we can never even look at it ever again. So it would take the right engineering, but so maybe some portion of them could be redeveloped. It just doesn't take it off the table like the FEMA buyout does, which would be beneficial for both the community and the residents who are both in unfortunate situations currently.
Thank you. Representative Matson?
Yeah, you mentioned BRELA.
Yes.
Is I don't know if I call it a proposal or, what you're putting together.
Yeah.
It'll have BRELA language in it.
It's potentially that is something that we are.
Brownfields.
Yeah, BRELA is brownfields. And there's special powers that BRELA has and most land banks have where they can hold. Let me just step back. Most of the time, if you buy a contaminated property, you are in the chain of title and you have responsibility for that cleanup. For organizations that have this circle of power, they can hold contaminated properties without having that liability, with the understanding that that will be passed on to the end buyer. The land bank or the entity is going to help them getting phase 1 and phase 2 and help them get it into a place where it could be cleaned up, and then they sell it to the end user. So.
And it's turned over clean.
It's turned over clean, or it's turned over with a remediation plan.
Thank you.
It could be one of the two.
Thank you very much.
It's not 100% sure whether the land bank will have those powers too. That's a conversation we're having with the brownfields folks.
Thank you both so much for your time and all your work on this. Sounds
And
really
we're not asking for anything right now, just interest for a future conversation.
Yeah. Stop on over for one of our meetings. We'd love to have you.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
And next up, we have James Fenn from the Mountain View Supervisory Union. Hello.
How are you? So let me tell you a little bit about our project, that I don't have a nice PowerPoint like they had earlier. But we started our project actually in
Can you,
2014.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but can you tell us who you are for the record first, even though I
Sure.
just said your name?
I'm James Fenn. I'm the Director of Finance for Mountain View School District, formerly known as Windsor Central School District.
Thank you.
We started our project actually in 2014, so 12 years ago, with our high school board. At that point, we had 6 different districts and a high school board, doing an evaluation of the building to determine what they needed to do with it. We merged into a unified district in 2018 and have continued that process. I've been with the district 5 years. In the last 5 years, we've spent over $7 million on building maintenance on all of our buildings, the majority of it on our elementary schools, bringing them up to a standard where they need to be. And we really have this 1958 building that the Department of Ed, in their assessment that you funded a few years ago, determined that its FCI, the Facilities Condition Index, was over 90%. In other words, over 90% consumed, and it really needed to be replaced. Like the other school district that was done earlier, we met with Bob Donahue. He did give us preliminary approval on our project in 2024. We got it February 16th of 2024. And just to let you know, the 2000 whatever construction planning guide was updated and revised on January 29th, 2024. And so that's the standard that he used on our building. A lot of the work in that is still from the old handbook. But generally, our building met those conditions. 2 years ago, we had a $96 million project. He awarded us 86% of our building as qualified and the other 14% not qualified. We brought it to our voters in March of 24, and the vote failed by 300 votes. We've revisited the building in order to not have to go through the pre-qualifications again. We brought the same building forward, and the building has jumped to 113 million from 99 million. We value and engineered about $1 million out of it and brought it to our voters again this year. And it passed by 1,600 votes to just over 1,000 votes. So our community is behind this building. We have a building that this summer we have to replace the sewer line in, because the cast iron sewer line that was put in 1958 has deteriorated to the point that we don't have a pipe anymore. We have sewage running through gravel and concrete. So we have to drill it and jackhammer the concrete, put a new pipe in and put a new floor in. And the 1958 steam boiler that we've kept running for 68 years has outlived its useful life by 100% and has failed, and that needs to be replaced for next year. So those are our 2 projects we're doing on this building this summer just to keep it open. Our new building is scheduled to go on the same campus that our old building is, so it can be built on the football field, doesn't interrupt education going on in our building. And then when the new building is occupied, we will remove the old building and put a new football field where the old building is. You've talked a little bit about per pupil costs. We're already above the threshold. The 2 projects that we're doing this year are $550,000. That's $86 per pupil on our per pupil cost. And if it's not exempted from the penalty, it's $172 that our taxpayers have to raise for the $86. Our new build, at its highest, will have an annual debt service cost of $8,344,000, very similar to the one we saw earlier. That will increase our per pupil cost by $5,613. If we have a penalty, it'll increase our tax impact by over $11,000 per pupil. Excuse me, $1,100. Yeah, $11,000 per pupil. When you think about our communities, and we have 7 communities that are members of our district, also keep in mind that out of every dollar raised between the homestead and non-homestead taxes in our communities, 62 cents doesn't stay locally, it goes to Montpelier, and only 38 cents of every dollar raised is used in our districts. So although we are a land wealthy or real estate wealthy district, a lot of the money raised is used to support education elsewhere in the state.
Mr. Flynn, your couple questions?
Please.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood that you were saying that before the bond vote passed, you were above the excess spending threshold in your district.
Yeah.
Okay. And I have a vague memory from reading the articles and maybe a less vague memory from talking to Representative Kimball about this fairly regularly, that there's a contingency in the bond vote related to legislative action. Can you tell us about that and how your voters understood that? Sounds very complicated.
It's complicated. There's a contingency, and the contingency is if the legislation does not separate the construction or the bond debt from the per pupil penalty calculation as it currently is, then our project can't go forward. So if you go back to 2 years ago where the bond debt was separated from the penalty calculation, we're great. If you keep it the way it is right now, our project won't go forward. There's also a second condition that we raise a percentage of the project cost in local or state funding. We're above the $5 million threshold in local gifts already towards this project. If we get the base 20% building aid that's written into Act 73, putting that with our local funds, we are at the threshold, so we can go forward on that part of the condition.
Thank you. And then I know that your district is really quite close to 2 other districts that also have high schools that might be in need of some new construction and or bonding. And I'm curious about the conversations about, well, frankly, you seem like a prime spot for a regional high school somewhere amongst the mix of those 3 districts. And I wondered about what conversations looked like with that in advance of your local bonding.
We being mostly our board chair, has spoken with board chairs of several of the area districts to greater or lesser levels of agreement. We have several communities that would love to be part of us. They can't be part of us right now because of the restrictions of the Articles of Agreement. And so as long as the Articles of Agreement as they currently exist under law remain in law, they can't leave their districts and join us. The communities I'm thinking of would take us from about 1,000 student district up to almost a 1,700 student district. So that would put us much closer to a 2,000 student threshold, which I think is a good threshold. We spent a lot of time talking with Hartford. Hartford does not have the building capacity to absorb us. They have PCBs, they have lots of work they're doing just to keep their buildings open.
I think I'm asking less about inviting other people to come to your sandbox or going to other people's sandbox and more about everyone building a new sandbox together.
I found a piece of land for that, and nobody wanted to talk about it.
Okay. Do you have a
I
sense
found a
of
great
why?
piece of land for it, and nobody wanted to talk about it.
That must have been very frustrating. Do you have any sense of why that happened? I would tell you you're not on the record,
It's
but
like
you
the
are.
Yellow Jackets and the Wasps don't want to join together. If you just think about the teams and these communities, there's the
The mascot for Woodstock is the
100
Wasp.
years
I
of
don't know if everyone
rivalry,
knows.
if that makes any sense.
And is Hartford the Yellow Jackets?
No, they're the Hurricanes.
Oh, okay. Well, that would be hard, all that spinning.
Yeah.
Bugs.
And there's just these 100 years of rivalry that and you know, because we merged under Act 46, you know how much work that was for the few of us that voluntarily did it under that. It's tough politics to do that without somebody telling us we have to.
Jim, it's Charlie. Nice to see you. So the process, when you were talking about the re-engineering work, value engineering, I'm sorry, the process that you've gone through, Bob Donahue speaks highly of the school district and what you did. Could you just tell us about what the process was when you came up with a design and then subjecting it to other scrutiny?
Sure. Our initial design several years ago came in at $110 million. And we designed the building with everything everybody wanted. And then we said, okay, we can't afford that. We've got to get it under $100 million. And so the penthouse for the rooftop devices went away. We went to a flat roof, saved us $1 million. We'd gone 100% geothermal. We went 50% geothermal, cut $2.5 million out of it. We had 3 kilowatts of solar panels. We've cut those out of the project, and we'll do a power purchase agreement for solar power instead of owning the solar panels. That's the type of work we did. We downsized some classrooms. We actually took a block of 8 classrooms and cut it into 4 classrooms. So we've done, narrowed the hallways by 2 feet, little things like that, but everything we could do to start cutting some money out of the project. And we cut $10 million out of the initial one. When we came back this time, we redid the facade, redid the front of the building, reduced some glass, reduced other things to take another $1 million out of the project.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time today and all the time you've spent in your own community figuring this out. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Folks, we are now going to turn to the great work of other states, starting with Mr. Sean Matlock from Prince George's County Public Schools, who did a really cool big project, and I'm hoping he'll tell us about it. Welcome, thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Sean Matlock, and I'm the director of the Office of Alternative Infrastructure Planning and Development for Prince George's County Public Schools. I was their former capital director. I served in that role for roughly about 7 years. And put Prince George's now, I'm from a little town in South Jersey, and the school building that I went to, my mother went to, it was built in 1942. I went from elementary school all the way through middle school and high school in that same building, as did my mother, and that building is still in operation. So I very much appreciate that a district, a small school district, can very much keep a building alive and with good maintenance, care, and understanding if they want to keep a school building going. And I come from that conservative background. However, Prince George's County is a very different place. Prince George's County, to put it in some context, is the 19th, between 18th and the 19th largest school district in the country. In comparison to Vermont, we have about 40,000 more students than the state does, but we have around 2/3 of the number of school buildings that you have. So you have roughly around 300 school buildings. We have somewhere around 210 school buildings, not including buildings that have been used for administrative purposes and other various purposes. So we're a fairly large school district, and like your state, we had a moratorium on our county construction that lasted over 20 years. So we had a lot of buildings that did not get replaced for quite some time. And as a result, some of our older buildings that were already old got older, and we have the second oldest inventory in the state of Maryland, despite having the second largest number of schools in the state of Maryland. And so as a result, we had a lot of old school buildings. And in addition to that, we had a lot of overcrowding in the northern part of our county. And so we had to do something about it. We had done several studies on modernizing our infrastructure, and we ended up, I got in our 2017 Educational Facilities Master Plan, we determined that we needed almost $8.5 billion over 20 years to modernize roughly half of our inventory. And there was no way we were going to get that kind of money. It just wasn't going to happen. And so we had to come up with some unique ways to fund some of our more critical needs. And so we identified, we went out and did some research and ended up putting together a work group with our county council. And we ended up doing what's called a P3. Now, so we divided our infrastructure or our school construction plans into three phases. One is traditional construction for our larger projects that were very, very expensive. Then we had some schools that had really good bones but needed updating, so they dropped into our renovation bucket. And then we had the schools that needed to be replaced, couldn't be renovated, and were of a certain size. And they fell into our bucket that we ended up doing, or potential schools that could be built through a public-private partnership, or P3. Now, the P3s are roughly, to describe them, they're basically a range of contractual ranges between public agencies. A private entity delivers the public infrastructure facility and the services. There are a wide variety of financing models and that differentiated by allocation of rights, risks, responsibilities between the public and the private entity. Some contracts can be less than 15 years. They can be design builds or CMARs or guaranteed maximum price contracts. There's the middle ranges, where we fall into, which is between 15 and 50 years, which are design, build, finance, operate, maintain, or design, build, finance, maintain. Basically, the private sector goes out and gets the money. They do the design, they finance that construction, and then they maintain the building. And the district or public entity pays them back over time at the conclusion of that construction for the construction and for the maintenance. And that usually lasts, it's a payback, sort of like a mortgage. It's the best way to describe it. And then there's a privatization, which is something nobody really is interested in doing. Even under the DBFOM and DBFM models, the school district owns the buildings, so they are not at risk. There are also other versions of that called like a lease back and things like that. So the reason to use a P3 is basically to accelerate the capital plans by leveraging private sector financing, achieve operational efficiencies and life cycle costs, remove risks of future maintenance deferral, utilize private sector innovation to better manage the risk and incentivize performance, and provide long-term budget predictability, which is one thing that's proven to be a benefit to our county. So what we ended up doing is we built, our first build was 6 schools that were middle schools and one K through 8. And what this did was it allowed us to increase capacity and remove our 6th graders from our elementary schools, which relieved the overcrowding in our elementary schools. And we built bigger middle schools, which made the middle schools able to absorb more students and spread them out. And we ended up consolidating buildings. And that consolidation reduced our overall maintenance burden by basically reducing the number of roofs that we would have to maintain, and by eliminating these older roofs, the basic cost of those maintenance was reduced dramatically. In addition to that, in these contracts, we built a refresh. So at the end of 20 years, all the systems have to be updated by the developer, and that cost is already built into the price. So when the buildings come back into our portfolio at the end of 30 years, they're not in bad shape. They'll be in good inside another 30-year useful life zone. And so that's what we're designing for. So we built these schools. They are all 6 were built and delivered. They were designed, built, and delivered in 3 years. They're currently been in operation now for roughly 3 years. And the way we paid for it is that we already had a revenue stream for our capital program, and we diverted a piece of that revenue stream, roughly about $15 million, to cover the capital spend annually. And then our county agreed to provide a little additional money into our operating budget to cover the maintenance or the services charge of the spend. And between the two, we started off with a $27 million annual payment for the schools over 30 years. It does rise in price due to escalation costs on the services side, but that's generally how that transaction worked. That was such a successful program that the state, who did not participate in the original transaction, decided that they were willing to help us finance a second one. And so our county, utilizing a portion of its what they call it, communications tax, and the state using funds from our Maryland Stadium Authority, created a fund. And they funded 8 more schools. These schools, we are going to have 6 elementary schools and 2 K through 8s. One actually ended up being a 3 through 8. Right now that project is ongoing in the construction phase. We'll be delivering 2 schools this summer, 4 schools next summer, and then the following summer, the last 2 schools. And that project was a bit more pricey because of escalation costs and also the size and locations of these buildings, and also because we put a project labor agreement on top of that. But the thing that we got on this one was because of the financing arrangements, we were able to not have any escalation. So the charge is flat throughout the entire 30-year period. And that's generally what we're doing. And we've eliminated a lot of overcrowding. We've even been able to go green on our second phase. So 7 of the 8 schools will be net zero ready with geothermal and solar panels. They're bigger, and so we've been able to consolidate. Although we're only building 8 schools, we're consolidating over 14 schools into those 8 schools. And we're getting and the communities are happier about the consolidation, because instead of going into one old building, they're being consolidated into a brand new facility with all the updated amenities. So it's been a very successful program so far.
Thank you. A few questions around, I'm going to ask a couple questions and a few questions around the table. This is so exciting. Thank you. And I do hope you can come back or at least meet with a couple of people offline so we can learn more. You talked about sorting your buildings into sort of 3 buckets. Who sorted them? And what happened to the people who lived near them after you sorted them into buckets?
So again, we focused on overcrowding first, and we sorted them by size, basically, and by character. One of the things that we were trying to achieve, and which we did achieve, was a degree of scale of maintenance, or scale of purchasing, right? So we built very similar schools. Most of these schools are built around a prototype design, right? So that we get repeatability in the purchasing of HVAC systems and other systems that we needed. I have to point out that the first 6 were bid and developed during the COVID crisis. And as a result, there was a supply chain issue. But because our purchases were so large, we were able to get priority in delivery of these items. And so it was very good for us to do that. The way we sorted them was initially we had already developed a priority of schools that were going to be constructed. So we had 31 schools that were already on a list for construction, replacement, or renovation. Within that group, what we determined was, in order to get the biggest bang for our buck, it would be very hard to do high schools, because high schools are very big and very expensive, and it would eat up too much of the capital. So we excluded them from the list of consideration. Then what we did is we focused on the need. So the need was to eliminate overcrowding. And so the schools where we could eliminate that issue best were the ones that got priority for P3s. There were 2 other schools that were being built at the same time. So a lot of the schools in that priority got constructed. The ones that got renovations were ones that didn't require an expansion. They're getting renovations. Those renovations are moving forward on a different timeline. And the new construction, again, is moving slower because we're using traditional funding. So that's moving slower, though we did our high school, Suitland High School, which is basically a showpiece for us, will be finished next spring, or this coming spring, and it's a very big high school. The 2 other middle schools that were done at the same time were also big schools, but they were also done on similar models. So the pricing turned out to be almost the same in cost from a capital spend, but they were done with using traditional funding because of where they were and how far along their projects were. And then, as I've stated, the elementary schools are pretty much excluded from the first phase, but they've been included in the second phase. So the second phase is where we're picking up a lot of our elementary schools that needed replacement.
Thank you. And then you said you paid for it, one section of it with a communications tax. Was that new revenue that was created in order to fund this, or were you diverting existing revenue?
So we were diverting existing revenue. So the first time around, we had so to give you I've been listening to your discussions, and the way you do your capital is slightly different. So let me give you a little.
It's different from every other state, unfortunately.
Well, it's slightly different. So the way we work is the state has roughly about $250 million annually that they parse out to the various districts, and they basically rate your projects based on some sort of criteria. And then what you do is then you get a certain amount of that budget annually for your project, and then they contribute roughly 7% of direct construction costs, and then the other 30% of direct construction costs plus design and FF&E and all those other things come from the local community. So that's generally how they do that. And so because of that rate of funding, it's much slower. It's harder. You have to take your funding over multiple years in order to build a school or 2. So that's why it's slower and harder to do. And then if you want to accelerate it, you could, but it would require more local funding to do it. Our local budget is probably considered very large compared to what you all have. We have roughly about our local budget and our state budget combined, it roughly works out between $120 and $160 million annually. So what we did was we parsed off roughly about 10% of that, $15 million, which would have gone probably to a large renovation project. And then instead of using it for that, we used it as a revenue stream. So that revenue stream always existed on our capital side. On the operating side, we have operation for maintenance, so they increased our maintenance budget in order to cover some additional costs related to the P3. So both budgets on the first one existed. We just basically carved them out. Now on the second one, there was a communications tax that was already going to the school system. And what we agreed was that we would give that revenue back to the county, and they would take a portion of that and they would use that revenue to fund their contribution to the P3. So it was already a revenue stream. It was already going to the school district. We just allowed them to take it back as a revenue stream, and then they diverted a portion of it to us. MSA, which is the Maryland Stadium Authority, that's the only new revenue that really popped into this. And that was off of a state funding bill that they were utilizing, and we were carved out for a P3, and they used the Maryland Stadium Authority revenue as a contribution to their portion of that, and that's the only real new revenue.
Thank you. And then there were a bunch of hands, but I've lost them.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Very interesting, very informative. Back when you were describing the public-private partnership model, but a later or something like that, when you talked about the first schools you did that way, you used the phrase when they were returned to your inventory. Was there a change of ownership or ownership model?
No.
No. What did you mean, sir, by return to your inventory? I didn't follow that.
Okay, so the buildings are under a DBFM, which is a design, build, finance, and maintain. So during 30 years while we're paying for the buildings, the developer maintains those buildings. So they're responsible for all capital maintenance. So at the end of 20 years, they're refreshing all of our systems. So new HVAC system, new windows, new floors, new everything, in order to make sure that the useful life of the building, when it returns to our maintenance control, is not, they're not falling apart. They're not at the end of their life. We still have useful life in all those systems. So that was the reason when I say control, I mean our maintenance department's control, not necessarily ownership. We own the buildings outright.
That makes sense, and thank you for the clarification.
Mm-hmm.
So again, thank you. The idea of building that many buildings at once, and I think you said that you had, I wouldn't say cookie cutter, but pre-approved designs that are then altered to the specifics of the site, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to put together that portfolio of designs? Was that quick? How did you decide what it was? Yeah. Can you help us understand that?
Sure. So a procurement of a P3 is slightly different than regular procurement. So they bring their own designers to the table. So during the procurement process, they were giving us preliminary designs. They had to get to about 35% in order to bid. So from that, for them, it's an expensive process. But they got to about 35% of design. So we generally knew what we were getting before we even got the pricing for the buildings. And we engaged with them during that process. That was our first version. And what we determined was in our second version, we did it slightly differently. They didn't, because the first one they bid on price, and we had a price, and we basically knew how much it was going to be before we made a selection of a developer. The second time, we didn't do that. The second time, we actually worked with them to develop the budget, sort of like a GMP development team, and we worked alongside them. So we selected on their preliminary qualifications and ability to finance, and on their preliminary idea of a design, but then we got together and sat on the same side of the table and worked through those designs before we executed a contract. So there's this period called the exclusive negotiation a period where in both sections where we sat with the developer and worked through those intricacies. And so and those are all, and we try to provide, and this is one thing you have to do with P3, is you have to provide a lot more information than you would on a regular bid. So programming information, all those general specifications we provided in advance so that they could build around those specifications and those programming needs. So to give you an example, a school that has an autism program is going to be different than a school that has a traditional special education program. And so those requirements need to be provided in advance if you know what you're going to build, and which is what we try to do.
So enrollment and projections, everything. I mean,
Yes.
you've got to really nail down. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
The buildings that you took offline as school buildings, what did you see as the district's responsibility towards the next stage of that building's life?
So to be quite blunt, most of the schools that we built were built on the site where they were. So we had some space to do some swings. One school that was rebuilt still exists in our portfolio as a school, and we use it as swing space. For other new construction, we're using it for the second phase of construction. Some of the schools were completely replaced, so they and some of them didn't exist before. So these were all, and then in our second phase, any school. So our second phase, one of the issues we had was as with aging portfolios, we had schools that were condemned. Basically, they were unusable as schools. And so what we've been doing is tearing them down and demolishing them. We're looking to do other things with them. So parkland, sharing it with our Parks and Planning Department. We are looking at housing development for potential use. We're looking at clean energy development, and we're looking at alternative community uses for those sites. We don't really want to give up the sites if we can avoid doing so, for one simple reason. We are in an area where we're the largest landholder, but most of the land around us is being developed. So as a site either is unburdened with the school, no longer has a school on it, then what we might want to do is say, okay, we're going to keep it for future in case there's growth in the area. We want to hold on to the land. So we'll find a temporary use that can work under a ground lease, and then we generate some revenue off that property in a non-permanent use. And then when we need it, usually probably in 10 to 30 years, 30 to 20 years or 40 years, then we'll be able to get that property back and reuse it for what we need to use it for.
Thank you. And two more questions. The way you're describing this, it sounds like a very tidy top-down process to some degree. How did community engagement work?
So, in some ways it was, in some ways it wasn't. So, what we do for every project is we have what's called a project planning committee, right? So that's made up of both the faculty, local politicians, local homeowners associations, and other groups that are involved in the design of the facility. Not so much from well, how big will it be or what program will go into it, but some of the aesthetics around the building and the site and the use of the site, how it fits within the walk zone, how it fits traffic issues, things like that we need to consider when we're putting together a building. There is, in order to get mandatory referral, which is a requirement for us under the development, under the project planning requirements in our county, we have to hold a number of local meetings with the community at large. So we both communicate with the school community, but we also have several meetings with the community at large to discuss what we're planning to do and how we're planning to do it. Now, let me just say this. Not everyone is always happy. We did build one school.
You don't need to tell us that.
We did build one school where the community did not want the school. Unfortunately, though, we had to build it there. There was just no choice. We also had a community that's been asking for a school for the last 40 years. And we finally were able to deliver them a school that they've been waiting for 40 years. So it's a mix and match.
Thanks. And then my last question is, are you using union labor on all this building?
Yes. So on the first project, roughly about 30% of the contracts went to union shops, mostly your big union shops, like your electric, HVAC, that sort of thing. On the second P3, we have a project labor agreement, and almost all the work is going to union shops. So, and we worked out basically the developer was required to work out an arrangement with the combined union representation, and they basically now provide some of the oversight on the contracts from that standpoint. So, two different P3s, two different delivery models, two different selection models, very different projects, but
Thank you.
same general idea.
Representative Odie Burkhart Maslin.
I was interested in what you said about even bond payments over the years, because we just saw an example from another town where it goes, it's here and then it goes up and then. So what do you do? What do you do, Bill?
So we didn't do the financing on it, but we did help structure it. We had one of our best advisors is a company called XXM, and they helped us put together the financial model for it. And basically, when the market was really much like the model that we put out, and because it was a government-backed project, the return on the project looked pretty solid. We actually oversubscribed by 500%. So we asked for 700 million in capital bond funding for the overall project, and we got $3.5 billion in orders. And as a result, we were able to then go back and negotiate down the financing charges, and then as a result, we ended up coming up with a flat financing number. And so there is no escalation on the charge. It will be the same amount of money, same contribution from the state and the county every year, and for the next 32 years.
But if you had asked for the 500 and then had go down to 300, well, what would you do if you really thought you wanted 100 and then that's all you wanted and you wanted to be even? You just stuck with financing people.
Well, I that's a hypothetical. I'm not really sure how to answer. But I can say that we've been very successful on both tranches, and P3s are very well liked in the marketplace because the returns are pretty stable. That's why they like them. And in fact, the second one, we're even opening it up to the public. So what's happening is 10% of the equity portion is being made available to residents within our county so that they can participate as investors in the overall project. Anything that they don't buy, then the developer will retain, but we're making it available to them so that they can participate because the return is significantly higher than general, a regular investment would be. So that's kind of, it's a very good investment for the banks, apparently. And the way they've structured the financing is very, very favorable to us.
Thanks. Mr. Malik, you mentioned that there is a contribution from the communities. So there's a portion of the projects that are not state and county funded. How do the local communities go about raising that additional revenue to provide their portion?
So it's all state and county funded on our side. What we're allowing them to do is join the developer group, basically as investors. And so any local person in the county will be able to contribute up to $200 per share, and up to the 10%. And so it's for them. It's what happens is the school system, less than 20% of the people have kids in the school system. So that means, how do you make this, something that's attractive for the rest of the people in the community? How do they benefit? Well, yeah, they do benefit from a better infrastructure and save money saved on better schools and things like that. But one way to make it a more direct benefit to them was to give them the opportunity to invest. And I think the return is like 9% annually. So it's a very nice return. And it's a stable return. And if you want to invest, you can. If you don't, then the developers will keep whatever you don't buy. but we're giving them up to 10% to the community in order to invest in this project.
There was something else too.
Representative Maslin?
Yeah, easy question, sir. Again, thank you again. In your county, is your enrollment declining or increasing?
So that's a tricky question, and I'll answer it this way. We are a county that used to have a lot of refugee and asylum seekers and stuff because of where we're located, right? So we've seen, as a result of the decrease in immigration, we've seen a decrease in our overall enrollment. So we've gone down about 2,000 students, I think, this year from where we were last year. So we're seeing some decline in enrollment in that regard. But our buildings are getting bigger because we're putting pre-K, like some of the other schools, we're putting pre-K classrooms into our schools, and the state is moving towards universal pre-K. So we are using more capacity, though our K through 12 enrollment is going down slightly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. I think we all took a lot of notes around the table, and appreciate your patience if a couple of us are back in touch.
Oh, hey, we're here to help other school districts and other places to build schools for schools. The reason why schools are our kids, because I'm involved in this, not primarily because I really think that our kids deserve to be able to go to school in healthy, really good learning environments. And learning environments can't just be a warehouse, because there's so much that goes into a good school. And we're just trying to build better schools. And if I can help in any way, I'm a phone call away.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
And next up, we have Mario Carino from Rhode Island. Another.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks to everyone who helped back up the testimony for it. Hello, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your patience in waiting for us to get to you. I'm sorry we put you last. And we've all heard a lot about the Rhode Island model over the last few years, and just really glad to have you here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very similar to your state, we were in a moratorium between 2011 and 2015. We conducted a needs assessment, I think very similar to what you have done, which identified at the time it was over $3 billion of needs that were deferred throughout our state. The average age of our buildings was over 60 years old. And the legislature and the governor at the time made it a priority to help solve this. One of the things that is apparent is that there's also a cost to doing nothing. And I think that should also be determined here. In the example that James gave earlier, that new project that he referenced, which was $99 million a few years ago, has now escalated up to 113. They're going to cut out scope to get it back to 99. You just are going to get less bang for your buck by waiting. That applies to everything. Costs over the last, I think, 5 years are up 30%. So there's a cost of just waiting and delaying. These buildings don't regenerate, they don't get better. You have to act to make significant change. We have a reimbursement-based process in Rhode Island that ranges from 35% as the minimum to up to 96%. It's a wealth index. This funding formula for schools is separate and apart from our foundation aid. Rhode Island General Law 16735 makes it very clear that the purpose of what's known as school housing aid is designed to ensure adequate school housing for children, but also, and I think it's important, is to guarantee that it doesn't impact the operations of the school district. The prospect of having to fix a boiler or a leaky roof in exchange for laying off 10 teachers doesn't seem like a wise trade that anyone should be consider making it. Even some of the examples earlier today seem problematic, and that's not a choice that should be made, which is, for that reason, Rhode Island law separates the two, so you don't make that choice. Local districts will issue bonds and the state then reimburses them over a 20 to 30 year period. This is done for a variety of reasons. Number one, it's to ensure that the project actually completes. Until the time of completion, the risk is 100% on the local municipality. The state does not pay a dime until the work completes. Once it completes and it's confirmed that it conforms with our school construction regulations, then we'll begin to make our debt service payments again over a 1 to 30 year period. We also reimburse capital reserve funded projects. So those are projects that are smaller in scale that districts have available resources to fund. Those are reimbursed in 1 to 3 years. As recently as 2018 and 22, the state issued a statewide school construction bond, and access was given to every LEA in the state. That was to help spur projects as well as reduce the size of local debt by issuing that bond. We have a proposed bond this November, a $50 million bond specifically for CTE programs and those investments. That's another funding source we've had. The third one that's been in effect for 10 years now is known as the School Building Authority Capital Fund. It allows the state and the Rhode Island Department of Education to target specific types of programs. It could be CTE related. We've had a facility equity initiative, it's been known as. We have done a food truck program, which we've given 16 food trucks to high schools across the state to help kids learn how to start a business. We have done funding for the arts, for wellness furniture, for technology and equipment. So it just gives us a wide range of latitude to address our buildings. With that, I'll turn it over to any questions, and I'm happy to share other details, as detailed or as not detailed as you like.
Sure. Could you 35 to 96% assistance in repaying the bond taken out by the school, and you said it's the calculations by a wealth index. Are you talking grand list, or is it? Tell us how you figure out the index.
Yep. So it's the easiest way to put it is we look at the average daily membership for a community as compared to its aggregate property values, and then we divide that over the state's average daily membership and everyone's property values. I mean, we actually have a sheet, I'll send it to you, but essentially it's that. It's your enrollment and your property values compared to that of the state. That figures out your base reimbursement rate. We also, between 2018 and 2024, the state had specific incentives to help encourage behavior from districts. I know earlier on there was a discussion about potential regionalization. Without incentivizing or offering some sort of carrot, you'll find it defies logic that local communities don't want to work together. Your state is the same as ours. You will be hard pressed to find a local school committee or a town council who wants to give up their high school or give up their school system that's been a part of their town for hundreds of years in Rhode Island and specifically. So we have incentives for, and have them for newer and fewer, where if you have 2 buildings that are half full and you replace them with one, you received additional aid. If you were underutilized or overutilized, and address that. If you did educational enhancements or health and safety, and districts were able to get up to 20 points. That was a huge boost in approvals. Since 2018, Rhode Island has approved $5.5 billion of work for districts throughout the state. I believe at the moment we're tracking 50 new or like new schools in Rhode Island, which doesn't sound a lot, but we have, I think, a very similar number of schools to you. We have 306. The 50 new schools is the equivalent of California doing 1,300 schools. So at scale, it's a really large number that's done, but that's really driven by both the incentives, which were temporary in nature, which I think it's critical because you want decision makers to move forward. Again, the cost of waiting is something that you probably can't afford. And then it was also spurred by state bonds to help offset the cost of design and some of the things early on to get projects up and running.
I took quick follow-ups. The part that isn't covered by the state aid is that raised by local property taxes? Is it raised by some other source of revenue on the school district basis?
Yeah, so the way we have it here in Rhode Island is a district who is interested in applying, they first have to come through an approval process through the Department of Education, in that we look through the needs of the building. We look at enrollment projections. We look at local approvals. We look at a wide range of, the applications are thousands of pages. And then we will decide what level of approval, we'll grant them for the projects that they are proposing. In almost all cases, the needs that are identified locally far exceed local bonding capacity or even state willingness to address them. So we ask communities to prioritize, we further review and prioritize, and then move forward with an approval. There are instances in that we might approve, and I'll give you an example for a community. Warwick is the city who they're looking at doing 2 high schools. We had approved 313 million, but they wanted to do 350 million. There was some scope of work that they felt that they needed, that the community was willing to pay for, that the state wouldn't reimburse. They went forward, they got approval from voters for all $350 million. What'll happen is they have their debt service, we'll prorate what part of their debt is eligible, and then we'll run our reimbursement rate for them. Again, one of the reasons they were able to do both of their projects is because they're going to pick up 20% percentage points additional aid from the state on top of their base rate of 35%. So they're going to get 55% reimbursement, which it makes it financially feasible for them. And that way they're able to do both projects at once, which again, there's a cost to do it now, but the cost to do it now will always be less than doing it in 10 or 20 years.
Sure, but Warwick, in that case, are they paying for that percentage that's not coming from the state, from property taxes in Warwick?
That's correct. Yep, that's correct.
Okay, and then the second question, for those, if you have some communities that have a huge state aid, maybe it's like 80%, do you have examples of where that school districts has decided, even with that aid, that they're not going to move forward with the school construction project?
So the flaw, if you will, of a reimbursement-based program is that the communities who don't have any money are the ones who are at 90%. So in this case, the example of the one who has 96%, the state actually had to issue a bond for them. They exhausted every avenue. There was no mechanism where they could issue $100 million bond, even if the state was paying for 96 million of it. That's because the way it works in Rhode Island, and I think that was touched on at the very beginning of the meeting, we have an entity known as the Rhode Island Health and Educational Building Corporation, RIBEC. The municipality is responsible for making a payment, which then is reimbursed, in some cases as little as a day. They just can't come up with that payment, even though they know they're getting back 96 in a day. So we had special legislation for them. Providence, who, and I'm happy to share a report that we released on Friday, they get 80% reimbursement, which was temporarily boosted to 90. For decades, even though they had the means to do work, they chose not to. I think that district's also been under state control since 2020, but you can see some of the influence that's there. They are now looking at $1 billion plan, right-sizing their buildings, and by 2030, they will be, I think, one of the only urban districts in the country who can say that 100% of students will have access to new or like new schools. So change is possible, but it does take some encouragement. But to answer your question, even though you have a higher reimbursement rate doesn't mean you will actually do work.
And so in that, I want to just drill a little bit further into that scenario. So you said that the state issued that bond. Did the state say, we're giving you this building whether you want it or not? Here's your bond?
No, we did. This is a collection of stakeholders and interest groups. So you have a buy-in from the mayor of the city, of the school committee. I mean, their existing high school is 100 years old in Central Falls, and it's, some old buildings are fine if you maintain them. Theirs is not the case, and you can't hold kids accountable when the roof is leaking on them and the windows. So the need was there. There was a desire to do the work. There was a push and buy-in from the legislatures, from the treasurer, from the governor. Like it takes everyone, to come together to solve that one.
Thank you.
Speaking positive there.
Representative Pigley.
I think I heard you mention that there was a scoring of the projects. Do you have something you could send us as to what that looks like? Maybe explain it a little bit, but I'm sure it must be rather complicated and complex.
So it is, and it isn't. So in that, when this boom started back in 2000 and originally in 16, when they lifted the moratorium, and then after with the incentives, the legislature set a prioritization system, and I'll share with you our scoring in the event that the number of projects exceeded available funding. We never had to use that. So we did run the exercise. We had a scoring rubric. We would rank every project that would come in, and we would present it to our council, and they would approve it. That never had to be used. Again, depending on your angle, the benefit of a reimbursement-based system, at least for the state, is that you get the economic impact now because you're issuing the bond, you're putting people to work, you're doing the project, but you don't repay for it probably 4 years after it's approved, and then over a 20-year period thereafter. In that we were able to approve projects and never pushed up on the limit of having to actually use the prioritization list. 2 years later, the assembly actually removed that criteria, and anyone who came through our process and showed that there was a need gets approved. It's an entitlement program in the state of Rhode Island. So I can send it to you. It's a historic document, but fortunately we didn't have to use it. Again, it's hard to determine, from one community to another, who's more valuable. It's a hard question to even have to answer.
Thank you very much. I think you just answered my question with your scoring mechanism, but I was wondering, and I asked the previous witness, if there are basically competing school districts for resources. Would your scoring process help you sort that out, or do you have another process available?
Yeah. So again, in 2016, there was like that. The thought of it was that if funds became limited, then yes, it would enter into like this competition realm. Whether that's right or wrong, that's been removed. It's a straight up entitlement program. If you can document need, you can do, we have a square foot cost that's approved annually. We have a square feet per student that we approve. Like we have an elaborate document that ensures that every project that's being completed has a useful life of 50 years, that if you satisfy this criteria, you have local buy-in from both the municipality and the district. The voters are going to approve it. You also are required to get General Assembly approval on every single bond issuance before it gets to voters, that if you satisfy that criteria, the state will agree to fund your project.
Very helpful. Thank you very much.
All right, 2 other questions. So what is the source of the funds that you're using to provide that subsidy on the bonds? That's the one question. And the second is, you still have a separate foundation formula for the regular education of the students that's operating at the same time, correct?
That's correct. So I'll do your second one first. The formulas actually start the same, the housing aid formula and the basic education aid formula in terms of attendance and wealth divided by those. The funding formula then becomes more complex, and they look at wages, they look at the ability to raise taxes, they look at the number of families from K to 6 who live in poverty. Like there's other criteria that are not part of the school housing aid formula, but both have formulas in statute and they're separate and apart. So if you go to our website, you'll see every city and town has their aid all listed out, including any categorical funds that exist for them. And then separately, you'll find school housing aid on a different document. It's a different from them, because the thought is one shouldn't compete with the other. And that's been a constant in Rhode Island since 1960 when school housing aid was created. In terms of your first question, these are general revenues. So the process that we have is we get our approvals. Every summer, we survey every district on projects that, number one, have completed, and projects that they anticipate completing the prior year or the subsequent year. We will look at their debt service schedules. We'll figure out how much is needed, and then we give that information to the budget office. So they always have the information in advance, so they're able to budget appropriately for these. I will say, at least since 2016, with this process, the school construction aid category has grown slower than our overall budget. So it hasn't been an issue. Now, with 5.5 billion approved, that may not always be the case, but at least for the first 10 years, we have been able to approve and complete hundreds of projects across the state and are funding at a rate slower than the increase of our overall budget.
Okay, thank you. What is the actual annual layout for that subsidy? Do you know off the top of your head?
Yep. So this current fiscal year, we are 119 million.
Okay.
That includes projects. It's a medley of projects, right? We've had housing aid since 2000 and since 1960. Though no projects from that era are still on our books, but we have projects that were approved in 95 that we're still paying for the last couple of years. Projects come off every year, new ones jump aboard. And it just changes, but we always have the information to share with our budget office and the General Assembly so that they can adequately budget for that.
Thank you.
Representative Cook. Can I ask, Mario, what the administration, like what the administrative team looks like? So where is the administrative team for construction housed, and how many people are there? I'm just trying to envision what that looks like because we don't have.
Sure. So we have a very small staff. For the majority of this time period, there were either 3 or 4 of us who were here at RIDE. We have 2 architects, myself, and then we've had, like, it's rotated, but we've had 3 or 4 people. We recently received a federal grant, so we've expanded to 7, though 3 of them are temporary, but we have 4 now. We review the stage 1 applications, as it's known, where it's like you document the needs. The stage 2 is the solution to the needs. We do a lot of outreach with our districts. I think something that's really important to understand is that it's almost like a curve of influence, that the farther the project gets along, the less influence the state has. So we are at the very forefront of this, in that when districts are even beginning the process, we'll meet with them, with their building committees, we will make suggestions, we share our statewide assessments with them on opportunities that may exist. We will try and see if any districts around them are even interested in working together, though you won't find many where that's the case. Once a project is approved by our council, we also will do design reviews to make sure that the projects are approved in accordance with our regulations. Because of the volume of projects, we have consultants who help us with those reviews. Historically, we would do them in-house, but when you get into the billions, we can't do that with just 3 people. We also have a variety of funding sources. I mentioned earlier with the capital fund, state bonds, and reimbursement. So we have a person who's dedicated to making those payments. We also work with Rybeck, who has, I think, 3 people there, and they help process the payments to the cities and towns. So dedicated staff would be as little as 4. But then also we benefit from, Rybeck as individuals. We have legal here at RIDE, who a portion of the time is for us. We have the finance office at RIDE, who, a small portion is for us, but it's essentially a very lean entity and team that we have here at RIDE.
Thanks. One follow-up question. When districts are going to create their projects or do their projects, are they all then, it sounds like it's such a small team, they are then responsible for going out and doing their bidding process to find a consultant to help them develop a project? They're responsible for all of that master planning that happens before the project even gets to you? Or do you have any role in technical assistance in helping them find consultants or find architects or builders that are going to help them in their process?
No, great question. So we have created several, what's known in Rhode Island, a master price agreement list, where the state will procure services for project managers, for architects, for prime contractors. We'll review them and have them on a list. So at a minimum, they're able to go to those lists and access them. Typically, if the contracts are under $250,000, they're able to just grab someone from that list, though that varies municipality to municipality, whether that threshold applies to them. But we do offer guidance with those lists. We will also meet with districts and give them feedback from our own staff here, but they're ultimately responsible for picking their vendor. They are responsible and beholden to their building committee, which is a variety of stakeholders, both municipal, school district, as well as the public. And that's really where a lot of these decisions lie. And then we will frequently attend those meetings. I mean, the benefit of a small state, we can get anywhere in Rhode Island in an hour. I mean, we do meetings all the time with districts, and it seems to work fairly well.
This is just a tiny question, which I probably could look up, but while I have, how many districts do you have?
So districts is 36. However, we also have charter schools, which we have, I think, an equal amount. So even though we are a state with declining enrollment, which is probably very similar to y'all, we have more LEAs, which is the term we use, which includes both district and charter schools, than we did 20 years ago. So we have, I think, 65 LEAs, which brings up other benefits and challenges. We have, right, 65 superintendents in counties. I think the gentleman before me has a county that's probably bigger than Rhode Island. Right, we frequently, so I also oversee transportation, and we will frequently compare our system to Montgomery County in Maryland, where they have 25,000 more students than Rhode Island, but we spent $40 million more than them on transportation. There's a tremendous amount of inefficiency with a bunch of tiny districts, all with declining enrollments. And we have more districts than we did 20 years ago.
Thank you so much. Really helpful.
Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
And for your time for all the other times you've testified over the last few years as
No
we figure
worries.
this out. Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks. Ooh, so before we move to a new topic, I'm just gonna ask folks to please make sure you're keeping good notes of what ideas sounded good that we can put in the pot. Charlie and Bridget are gonna hold this pot.
I have a question for Charlie, I could ask now or later. Something that he said. And the witnesses, if I could ask him, testified that separating bond payment from something else, that you would know something about. Let me see if I can call it back up here. But
No.
I'll think of it.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So we're gonna move to special education. As folks might remember, we looked at language on this last week. It was about maintenance of effort.
Right.
And we have Erin from the Special Education Association here, the Vermont Council of Special Education Administrators, in fact, to testify about that language. Erin, thank you for your patience as our agenda got moved around.
No problem. Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So,
There you are. Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you were like a black box for a minute, but now
Oh.
you're here. Hi.
Okay, great. Great. And my audio is coming through fine?
Yep, everything's perfect.
Wonderful. Should I just jump in, or are
Floor
there?
is yours.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I'm Erin McGuire. I serve as the Director of Equity and Inclusion and Co-Director of Student Support Services and Instruction for the Essex Westford School District. I am the past president in the Vermont Council of Special Education Administrators. And I am also the past president for the Council of Administrators of Special Education, which is the national organization for special ed directors. I've been a special education director for about 25 years and am grateful to have an opportunity to talk with you all again related to the need for some conversation about maintenance of effort in the funding language in Vermont's funding related both to our needs in FY27, and I'll tie that to 28 and 29, as well as its association with the future foundation formula that has been in conversation related to Act 73. So I'm hopeful to talk about both of those topics. But before I jump into talking about how MOE applies, maintenance of effort applies in those two contexts, I'd like to just remind the committee related to the obligation that we have under federal law in IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, to ensure that we are maintaining our investment in special education in order to gain access to our federal funds. Federal funds in special education in Vermont play an important role. We are able to pay for many of our services in Vermont using federal funds. And if we do not spend at least as much as we did the year prior in local and state funding combined in special education, both at the local and the state level, we will not be able to fully access our federal funds. It is a requirement of federal fund access. You might know the language supplanting as the language in the federal law that sometimes requires particular actions to take place in order to spend federal funds. The maintenance of effort standard in IDEA is the supplanting rule to make sure that we are investing locally prior to having access to federal dollars. There is a requirement to spend at least as much as you did the year prior, with some exceptions. If you have students who move out of district, who are expensive, for example, that cause you to spend less, then you may reduce your maintenance of effort calculation to that lower number. So it doesn't mean that you can't sometimes have the amount that you spend the year before between state and local dollars actually drop in the calculation. You can through exemptions. But making systemic changes to the way that you deliver services is not an exemption for MOE. It is important that we do not put special education and general education in competition for the same dollars. And as we move forward with a new design for education funding in Vermont, we want to make sure that we don't do that. And so the suggestions here today are twofold to ensure that we don't create that challenge. The first one is related to your yield bill and the need to, and the language that is in there to ensure that we are adding an inflator to maintenance of effort to continue the census model from Act 173 into next year to make sure there's funding for special education aligned with Act 173. You may remember that Act 173 made a change to the way we fund special education. It shifted it from a reimbursement model prior to Act 173 into a census model for Act 173 post. And
Hey, Erin,
yes.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I'm sorry. So that language which we put in the yield bill, and we voted the yield bill out of the House someday last week. And it was referred to the Senate, and usually the yield bill goes directly to Senate Finance. It was referred to Senate Education. And we think it's because of that language. And so if you have the bandwidth to go check in with Senate Education, that would be super great.
Happy to
Because
do so.
it's the fact that the inflator just sort of wasn't there is very confusing.
Grateful that you all added the inflator back in from Act 173, so thank you. And I definitely can check in with Senate Education, and we'll make a note to do so and follow through on that to help them understand why that's so essential. I did just want to note, though, that the yield bill is a one-year solution to that, and we have FY28 and FY29 that will continue to be unstable on this issue without a permanent fix. So I did just want to point that out. I'm grateful for the one-year solution because I think it's
It was a
essential.
permanent fix. It was a permanent statutory fix, and it was just living inside the yield bill as its little vehicle.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Great. I understood the yield bill to be a single year.
Oh, the section the section that it sets the yield is a single year, but the section of statute that we amended for the inflator was forever a little bit of statute.
Fantastic. So that's great to know. Thank you for that correction. And that sounds great. That aligns with the testimony that we wanted to provide today on that topic. So let's move now into what we really want to talk about. Sorry for that little bird walk.
No. That's why I interrupted you. So thank you for letting me do that.
Thank you for interrupting. That was important. So what I want to talk about next is the need to ensure that in statute, we establish an expectation when the foundation formula goes into effect, that we will fund special education above and beyond the foundation formula, which is my understanding is the intent in everyone I've talked to, that we are looking to fund special education separate from the foundation formula, that the foundation formula will be the allocation for general education. And what I'm looking to do is establish an expectation that the amount of money that will be established in partnership with the foundation formula will meet that same standard of maintenance of effort plus an inflator model, and that would need to be true whether you put in a weighting structure, which is currently in Act 73, whether you put in keep the census grant model in order to fund special education above and beyond the foundation formula. What we want to do is make sure that we are not putting school districts into a competitive state related to foundation formula funds in order to meet maintenance of effort. I think that would be harmful to students. It would be harmful to districts trying to manage how to handle that. And I really don't think that we want to put students and families with disabilities and those of us working to serve those students in a place where we're having to move into foundation formula funds in order to fund special education. So that is really the ask from VCSEA, is to establish an expectation that we would go ahead and say, whatever model we put into place, the standard of expectation is that the model will fund at least to MOE plus the inflator that you actually put in the yield bill, and sounds like is in perpetuity from this point forward. So that is really the ask in order to make sure that we are appropriately funding special education with any funding change that we make. The last thing I'll say, and then I'm interested in a dialogue questions that you might have for me, is that we want to make sure that whatever we put into place, if we put a weighting structure into place or we put that census model into place, that the people who are doing the studying of that, which is the Agency of Education, who will have a report for you, has a clear understanding of that expectation from you, because I'm very worried that the study will suggest a model that doesn't do this, quite frankly. So I understand that, you know, it's possible that they might consider this issue in the study, but I think it needs to be required that whatever model is recommended to the legislature into funding special education within Act 73 is clearly ensuring maintenance of effort level of funding plus an inflator to school districts above and beyond the foundation formula. So that is why the language was proposed to you all. I am not, I'm certainly not Leg Counsel, and I am not an expert in writing legislation. So we did our best to describe what that might look like and open to a conversation about how we might ensure that we are moving forward with a design, as you talk about the foundation formula, that does not unintentionally put special education and general education in competition.
So the language that we have posted that came from you, but was revised very slightly by staff, that works for you?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I have not seen, should I have seen language?
I sent it to you. It was in the email I sent you.
It's on our website.
And it's also
okay. Okay. I asked Mary Lundeen for it. She had indicated she hadn't seen it. So, and she is not here, unfortunately, because we had to move the timing, but I definitely can take a look at it. And you're saying it is in the email that you sent related to this testimony?
No, when
Rebecca Holcomb sent you the language, but it's also posted under today's on the committee website. And Sorsha will send it to you.
That would be great, just so I can get it right in front of me without needing to like search around. That would be amazing.
Yeah,
thanks.
Absolutely.
I guess my question to you would be, do you feel like the language matches the testimony that I've provided and what I'm asking for?
I absolutely do, yeah. Did you have a?
No, Aaron, I was just thinking that from what your testimony is, and thinking about how we had thought about the construction of a foundation formula for special education, I hear concern that it by itself in that construct would not satisfy the maintenance of effort, or very likely could jeopardize it,
Correct.
even if it was carefully constructed.
We would need to make sure that there would be no way to ensure that a weighting design would meet the maintenance of effort threshold. And if you did that, it might make the weights cause overfunding in some places. So if you established the weights to ensure that the district that needed sort of the highest amount to meet maintenance of effort, and then those weights get applied to everyone, you may be overfunding. And I know we don't want to do that. So I worry about the current weighting design that is inside of Act 73, no matter how carefully you create weights that apply to everyone, that might create some real issues for you in one direction or another. Either you're underfunding and creating a maintenance of effort problem for some people, or you're potentially, if you could overfund, which you don't want to do.
Thank you. That's where I thought you were going.
Yeah. And then the, I think the idea of a census model kind of falls into that same category. If you're trying to base a census model on number of students, because the census model from Act 73 only funds about 50% of special education. So while we created a glide path to be able to say, okay, everybody's going to get to the same census model, the rest of the funding for special education was able to be fluctuated within our typical process of budgeting and funding through our property tax model. So with the calculations around CLA and tax rates and all of that. So I worry if you move to a census model, you almost have to establish the floor of the census on maintenance of effort. Otherwise, you're going to run into that same problem. You might be able to create a glide path to a more common census that isn't based on a historic maintenance of effort. But if you don't base the 100% of, if you're going to fund it 100% through a new model, then that model has to fund at the level of MOE for everyone, which is going to create variability by school district based on what they spent the prior year, as opposed to some weighting formula or some census model based on a student count. So that is the dilemma that we have, which is why I think establishing a floor of maintenance of effort and maybe a glide path to change the arc over time of special education funding might be possible. And you could do that in a census model. You could do it inside of a weighted model. But what you would need in order to get to that place is some kind of like calculation that creates the just right amount of funding in partnership with your model to make sure maintenance of effort is met.
Thank you.
I'm just looking at this language.
And Erin, you can get back to us. I don't want to force you to
Okay.
read on a big Zoom screen in front
Yeah.
of all that. I wouldn't want to do that if I were you. So,
Okay. It's fine.
yeah.
I mean, I will let you know if there's any deep concern about what's written. And as long as our intent is aligned, then I think we're probably where we need to be. And then this will then be, as long as it passes through, obviously, then it would be provided back into the folks who are doing this study so that then when they
Absolutely.
come up with a recommendation, it will actually meet the needs of Vermont. My biggest concern is that we're going to spend a bunch of money on a study that, unless it does this, is not going to be able to meet the needs of Vermont. And then we're going to be back in this conversation about how do we revise what has been suggested to make sure that we're not falling off this cliff. So I really
Absolutely.
appreciate you. Yeah.
Thank you. And if you do have any thoughts, will you make sure you copy Sorsha on them so she can backfill for us? Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you so much for your time today. Please send my apologies to Mary. And if she does want to jump on and testify later this week, she's welcome to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me and have a great
Thank
rest of your
you.
day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And folks, we are done for the day unless my preference would be to digest all my thoughts from that enormous block of time before we have a conversation. Great, okay, we're gonna do that. Tomorrow, we're not going to the floor. We're excused from the floor all week. Like I said, after we're done, if that's hard for you, let me know and I'll change the plan. And then, so we're gonna do a combination of how merger incentives worked under Act 46 in the morning, and then we'll spend the afternoon talking about what merger incentives we might want to carry forward into Act 73.
We also have the capital bill.
Oh, and we're starting the day with the capital bill. We're not gonna spend a lot of time on the capital bill, so I hope you're not disappointed about that. Yeah.
What merger incentives we want to carry forward into Act 73? Is that because there's no movement in the House in particular on districts?
There is much movement in the House on districts, Representative Higley. However, those districts are right now likely going to leave the House Education Committee as brokered voluntary districts.
Right.
Yes. And so we want to make sure that we have a fiscal plan that supports them coming together locally.
So again, because there's. Okay.